Hey there, tonight we're diving into why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Athens, where the truth is that democracy was a privilege for the few, and a plague could wipe out entire neighborhoods faster than a whispered rumor. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You jolt awake to the sound of the bustling city of Athens, where the alarm clock is a symphony of shouting street vendors, clanging blacksmiths, and the occasional bleating goat that seems to think it's a rooster. Forget the soothing piano tracks of your smartphone. This is your morning playlist, circa 5th century BCE. The sun's barely kissed the horizon, and already the city's alive, thrumming with the energy of a place that thinks sleep is for the weak. Welcome to the Agora, the beating heart of ancient Athens. This isn't just any marketplace. It's the center of your universe today. Think of it as Times Square meets the United Nations, with a dash of local farmers' market chaos. Here you can buy anything from olives to philosophical enlightenment, though neither comes cheap. For a drachma, you might snag a loaf of bread, if you're lucky and the baker is in a good mood. And don't even get me started on the amphora of wine. You'll need that later as you ponder the day's philosophical dilemmas. As you weave through the throng, the air is thick with the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the less-than-pleasant aroma of your fellow Athenians. Personal hygiene isn't exactly top-notch, but who needs deodorant when you have the scent of democratic discourse to cover up any natural odor? Speaking of democracy, here's a little reality check. You're in one of the world's first democracies, but before you start dusting off your "I voted" sticker, know this. Only about 30,000 of the 250,000 people here are actual citizens with the right to vote. Spoiler alert, if you're a woman, a foreigner, or a slave, you're not on that shortlist. So much for the cradle of democracy, huh? Let's talk about that glorious myth of Athenian democracy. It's like the ancient version of the American dream. Sounds amazing until you look under the hood. The idea of every citizen having a say in government is intoxicating, but the fine print is a killer. Citizenship is a VIP club for free-born Athenian men, and everyone else is stuck on the waiting list forever. It's a bit like being invited to a party where you can see the dancing through the window, but the bouncer just laughs in your face when you try to get in. The Agora isn't just about buying stuff. It's where the city's pulse can be felt. Philosophers with tangled beards and toga-clad politicians argue passionately about everything from the nature of justice to the best use of olive oil. You might bump into Socrates himself, asking one of his infamous questions that make you doubt whether you even exist. Trust me, it's best to sidle away before he ropes you into an existential crisis before breakfast. Speaking of Socrates, the guy's a bit like that friend who never shuts up about their latest self-help book. He's got this knack for asking questions that seem simple, but somehow leave you questioning your life choices. Rumor has it he doesn't write anything down, a bold move in a world that values rhetoric as much as a good wine. And instead, he's all about that live debate action. It's all fun and games until someone is sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, but that's a tale for another day. Now, let's not forget the silent workforce making all this possible. Slaves. It's a grim truth that while you're debating the merits of democracy, someone else is doing the dirty work that keeps this city running. An estimated 1/3 of the population is enslaved, handling everything from household chores to backbreaking labor in the silver mines. Their toil funds the splendor of Athens, yet they remain invisible in the grand narrative of glory and greatness. If you're feeling a bit queasy about the whole democratic utopia thing now, welcome to the club. The Agora is also a political hotbed where decisions that shape the city are made. The Pnyx, a hill where citizens gather to hear speeches and vote, is a stone's throw away. Picture a mass of togas and dust, where decisions are made by a sea of raised hands. No secret ballots here. Your vote is as public as your bath time at the gymnasium. The stakes are high, and the debates are as fierce as the midday sun. It's a place where rhetoric is king, and those with the gift of the gab can sway the masses, sometimes with more flair than facts. As you maneuver through this vibrant chaos, it's clear that life in Athens is a balancing act between the ideal and the real. The city is a paradox, a place of great ideas and harsh realities, where democracy is both celebrated and limited, and where the agora serves as a microcosm of its contradictions. Your day has just begun, and already the complexity of ancient Athens is as palpable as the dust settling on your sandals. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. There's still much more to uncover in the city that never naps. With the dust of the agora still clinging to your sandals, you make your way to the gymnasium. But don't expect any CrossFit or yoga mats here. Nope, this is where the real heavy lifting of the mind happens. Forget about sweating out calories. Today, you're burning through philosophical dilemmas. The gymnasium is more like a TED talk meets an open mic night for ancient philosophers. This is where Socrates might have strolled in, itching to fling a few well-aimed questions your way, aiming to unravel the very fabric of your understanding. Now, you might think the gymnasium is just a swanky club for intellectuals, but it's also a place where Athenian men flex their rhetorical muscles. Forget the dumbbells, it's all about the dialectic. Here, the Socratic method reigns supreme, a relentless barrage of questions designed to expose ignorance with surgical precision. Picture it. A bunch of toga-clad guys tossing around philosophical ideas like they're playing catch with live grenades. The stakes? Nothing less than the truth itself, or at least a version of it that doesn't crumble under scrutiny. But hold your horses, or rather, your chariots. If you're expecting to see women participating in this cerebral joust, think again. In Athenian society, the role of women was as limited as a two-wheeled chariot in a drag race. Most women were confined to the domestic sphere, their intellectual pursuits curtailed by societal norms tougher than a Spartan's abs. Sure, there were exceptions. Philosopher Aspasia might have been a rare bird in this male-dominated sky, but she was the exception, not the rule. The gymnasium was a boys' club, and if you weren't a free male citizen, you were likely stuck at home, pondering the universe while folding the laundry. This brings us to the gender dynamics that shaped Athenian society like a potter shapes clay. Men were the public actors, the decision-makers, the philosophers. Women were expected to manage the household and raise children. It's not that women lacked brains, far from it, but the system wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for female intellectuals. Education for women was largely informal and focused on domestic skills. In contrast, Athenian boys, around the age of 7, were sent to school to learn grammar, music, and gymnastics, the trifecta of a well-rounded education. The irony: while Athenian democracy was busy patting itself on the back for being the beacon of enlightenment, it was simultaneously sidelining half its population. Athenian women, much like the city's slaves, were the invisible hands that kept the great machine running. Without their labor, both paid and unpaid, the democratic and philosophical achievements of Athens might have crumbled faster than a pastry in a storm. Back to our philosophical powwow at the gymnasium. The Socratic method wasn't just a mental workout. It was a revolutionary tool that challenged the status quo. By questioning everything, Socrates and his followers laid the groundwork for critical thinking and the scientific method. This intellectual ferment didn't just stay within the confines of Athens, either. It rippled outwards, influencing Western thought for centuries to come like a philosophical tsunami. But let's not romanticize it too much. Socratic debates often felt like a verbal gladiator match, minus the bloodshed, but no less brutal. Socrates, with his knack for making people squirm, wasn't winning any popularity contests. In fact, his relentless questioning eventually led to his trial and execution for corrupting the youth and impiety. Talk about a tough room. And while the gymnasium was a breeding ground for intellectual giants, it was also a place of stark contrasts, a microcosm of Athenian society itself. On one hand, you had the pursuit of knowledge and truth, ideals that sound as appealing as a five-star vacation. On the other hand, you had the harsh realities of exclusion and inequality. The very same society that championed democracy and philosophy also enforced rigid social hierarchies and gender roles that would make a modern equality advocate's skin crawl. As you stand in the gymnasium, dodging philosophical zingers like a pro, it's clear that ancient Athens was a city of contradictions, a place where lofty ideals and gritty realities lived side by side, where the pursuit of truth was both celebrated and feared. But don't get too comfortable. Your day in Athens is far from over. There's still more to explore, more myths to bust, and more realities to uncover as you navigate the twists and turns of this ancient city. Keep your sandals on and your mind open. After all, in the city that birthed Western philosophy, the next big question is always just around the corner. With your sandals firmly strapped, and your mind still buzzing from the philosophical sparring session, you saunter back into the agora, now alive with the midday rush. Here, the marketplace is a microcosm of Athenian society, where trade and chatter flow as freely as the gossip about who wore their toga best at last night's symposium. But don't be fooled by the chaotic charm. This place is the economic engine of Athens, and understanding it is like getting a backstage pass to the city's real-time drama. Let's start with the currency that jingles in every Athenian's purse, the drachma. This little silver coin is your ticket to everything from a loaf of bread to a philosophical debate over wine. And where does this silver come from, you ask? Enter the Laurian mines, located about 35 kilometers south of Athens. These mines are the glittering backbone of Athenian wealth, a literal gold mine, except, with silver. It's estimated that these mines produced up to 1 million drachmas annually. Imagine the bling, the kind of wealth that lets you build a fleet of triremes or throw a feast that makes the gods jealous. Now, if you're picturing miners as burly Greek heroes, think again. This is where the brutal reality crashes the glamorous party. The mines were worked by slaves, toiling in conditions that made the underworld seem like a vacation. Cramped tunnels, toxic fumes, and the constant threat of cave-ins were just another day at the office for these poor souls. It's a harsh reminder that while Athens was busy polishing its philosophical halo, it was built on the backs of those who never see the inside of a symposium. Speaking of symposiums, let's talk trade. Athens isn't just a city, it's a hub, a crossroads where east meets west, and goods from afar find their way into Athenian homes. You've got Egyptian papyrus, Phoenician glass, and Persian carpets, all mingling with local olives and wine. The agora is a sensory overload, a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and smells that make modern-day markets look like a quiet Sunday stroll. This influx of foreign goods isn't just about variety, it's about power and prestige. The more exotic your possessions, the higher your status. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of having the latest smartphone, if your smartphone could be woven into a luxurious tapestry. But let's puncture a few myths while we're here. The idea that Athens was some egalitarian paradise where everyone had a fair shake. Total baloney. The wealth gap in Athens could rival any modern city, with the rich flaunting their silk robes while the poor scraped by like ancient versions of Oliver Twist. The elite owned vast estates and enjoyed the fruits of trade and politics, while the rest of the population, small farmers, craftsmen and slaves, struggled to make ends meet. We're talking about an economic divide so wide that even the Euphrates River would be jealous. And here's a twist that might surprise you. While Athens was the poster child for democracy, it was also a magnet for metics, foreigners who lived and worked in the city. These folks were the unsung heroes of the Athenian economy, handling everything from banking to trade. Yet, despite their contributions, they were second-class citizens, barred from owning land or participating in the political circus. It's like being the MVP of the team, but still riding the bench during the big game. Their taxes, known as metics, tax, were a nice little earner for Athens, another reminder that while democracy was the city's calling card, equality was still on hold. The agora wasn't just about buying and selling. It was a stage where Athenian identity was both displayed and constructed. Every transaction, every debate, every exchange of goods was a thread in the tapestry of what it meant to be Athenian. And while the rich and powerful strutted around like peacocks, the rest of the population knew that survival often depended on their ability to navigate this bustling marketplace. It was capitalism with a capital C, where the stakes were as high as Mount Olympus and the players as varied as the gods themselves. Now, let's not forget the state's role in this economic ballet. The city levied taxes on trade, collected fees from market stalls, and regulated everything from weights and measures to the quality of goods sold. These funds fueled public projects, from the construction of the Parthenon to the maintenance of the city's defenses. But here's the kicker. While Athens boasted about its public works and civic pride, the reality was that the city's prosperity often hinged on exploiting others. Slaves, metics, and even allied city-states who found themselves on the losing end of Athenian imperialism. So, as you stand in the agora, coins clinking in your pocket and the chatter of traders ringing in your ears, remember that this marketplace is more than just a place to buy your daily bread. It's the beating heart of a city that's equal parts genius and hypocrisy, a place where lofty ideals and gritty realities collide in a cacophony of human ambition. And while you might be tempted to romanticize the glory of Athens, don't forget the shadows lurking behind its gleaming facade. Your day in ancient Athens is far from over, and there's still more to uncover in this city of contradictions. Stay sharp, keep your pouch of drachmas close, and prepare for the next chapter in this whirlwind tour of history. And just like that, you're off to the Pnyx, the epicenter of Athenian power plays, where democracy isn't just a concept, it's a contact sport. Forget about cozy parliaments or quiet polling booths. This is where politics gets gritty. Here, on this rocky hillside overlooking Athens, real decisions are made, and sometimes those decisions involve booting someone out of the city for a decade. Welcome to ostracism, the Athenian version of Survivor, but with fewer palm trees and more life-altering consequences. Picture this. You're standing amidst a throng of citizens, each holding a shard of pottery called an ostracon. These shards aren't for crafting a mosaic, they're your ballot papers. Every year, Athenians gather here to decide if anyone's gotten too big for their democratic britches. Got a political rival who's a bit too popular? No problem. Just scratch their name onto your ostracon, and if 6,000 others agree, your rival is packing their bags for a 10-year vacation. It's democracy with a side of ruthless efficiency. Don't get too swept up in the romance of it all, though. This isn't the ancient world's version of American Idol. Ostracism was less about justice and more about political chess. It was a strategic tool wielded by those in power to keep potential threats at bay. And let's be clear, this wasn't some spontaneous act of collective wisdom. The names often came from whispers and backroom deals, a reminder that even in the cradle of democracy, power was reserved for the savvy few. Speaking of the few, let's dive into the mechanics of Athenian democracy, which operated more like a members-only club than a free-for-all. The city's decision-makers were the boule, a council of 500 citizens chosen by lot. Sounds egalitarian, right? Well, kind of. While the lottery system meant any citizen could theoretically have a say, the reality was that participation skewed towards the financially stable. If you were scraping by, spending your day debating the merits of naval policy wasn't exactly feasible. Then there's the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens that met on the Pnyx to decide on everything from war to grain imports. It was the heartbeat of Athenian democracy, where policies were debated in the open air. But before you imagine a utopia of free speech, remember, participation required time, and time was a luxury. The assembly could last all day, and if you were a farmer or craftsman, that meant a day without income. The result? The politically active were often those who could afford to be, leaving the average Athenian's voice as faint as a whisper in a bustling market. But don't shed too many tears for the disenfranchised just yet. The Pnyx was also a place of incredible rhetorical skill. where speakers could sway the masses with the right combination of logic and flair. It was a stage where the likes of Pericles could shine, delivering speeches that would echo through history. Yet, even these silver-tongued orators were often backed by wealthy patrons or were themselves part of the elite. It's a bit like imagining a rock concert where only the rich kids get front-row seats. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about the so-called equality of voice. In theory, any male citizen could speak at the assembly. In practice, it was a different story. The power of rhetoric was immense, and those who mastered it could steer the ship of state. But learning these skills wasn't free. It required education, which was often out of reach for the common citizen. So while the Pnyx might have been an emblem of democracy, it was also a reminder of the barriers that kept the average Joe at arm's length. Now, you might be wondering about the women in all this political drama. Spoiler alert. They weren't involved. The political life of Athens was strictly a male affair. Women, like the metics and slaves, were sidelined, their roles confined to the domestic sphere. It's a stark reminder that while Athens was pioneering democracy, it was also a society deeply entrenched in patriarchal norms. But let's not leave the Pnyx without acknowledging its significance. Despite its flaws, the Athenian system was revolutionary. It laid the groundwork for modern democracy, planting the seed of a government by the people, for the people, even if only a select group of people at the time. It was messy and imperfect, but it was a step towards the inclusive ideals that many societies strive for today. So, as you stand amidst the echoes of debates gone by, consider the legacy of the Pnyx. It's a place where the ideals of democracy clashed with the gritty realities of power, where ostracism reminded everyone that popularity could be both your ticket to influence and your Achilles heel, and where the dream of a government representing all was both born and constrained by the very society that imagined it. As the sun begins its descent over Athens, casting long shadows across the Pnyx, you've witnessed firsthand the complex dance of power and politics that defined this ancient city. The day isn't over, but you've already seen the gears turning behind the facade of Athenian democracy. It's a tale of ambition, strategy, and the perpetual human quest for power, one that continues to shape our world today. Keep those sandals moving, because Athens has more stories to tell, and we've only scratched the surface of its storied past. And as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues that even the gods might envy, you make your way to the heart of Athenian nightlife, the Symposium. Now, before you get too excited about a toga party, let's set the scene right. This isn't about wild festivities, but rather a cerebral gathering where wine and wisdom flow in equal measure, or so the hosts claim. Think of it as a cross between a TED talk and a happy hour, but with a lot more philosophical banter and fewer PowerPoint presentations. As you enter the Andron, the men's quarters designated for such gatherings, the atmosphere is thick with anticipation and the sweet aroma of libations. Recline on a couch, because chairs are for plebs, and prepare to dive into discussions that range from the meaning of life to the latest political scandal in Sparta. But here's the kicker. Not everyone's voice carries the same weight. Social hierarchy is as palpable as the scent of grape must, and the host, usually a wealthy Athenian, calls the shots on what topics are ripe for exploration. If your rhetorical skills aren't up to snuff, or you're not part of the inner circle, you might find yourself relegated to the role of a silent observer, or worse, a mere drink pourer. Wine, the great social lubricant, is both a blessing and a curse. It's diluted with water to avoid the dreaded fate of getting too tipsy to engage in coherent discourse, an ancient faux pas that could earn you the label of a lightweight faster than you can say Dionysian. The crater, a large bowl used for mixing wine, is the centerpiece of the Symposium, and its size is as much about boasting as it is about practicality. With every refill, the conversation shifts, sometimes veering into the absurd, other times delving into deep philosophical waters that would make even Socrates pause for thought. But let's not sugarcoat it. These gatherings are rife with contradictions. On one hand, they're the breeding ground for ideas that would shape Western thought for millennia. On the other, they're they're exclusive clubs where power dynamics play out in real time. The host's agenda often influences the direction of the discussion, and those who disagree too vocally might find their invitations mysteriously lost in the Athenian postal system next time. It's a reminder that even in a society that prides itself on open dialogue, voices are often silenced by the clinking of wine cups and the weight of social standing. And while we're on the subject of voices, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the absence of half the human population. Women are conspicuously missing from these intellectual fests, their contributions to Athenian society unrecognized in these hallowed halls. It's an irony sharper than the edge of a Spartan sword. A society that lauds itself for philosophical enlightenment, yet keeps its women in the shadows. The rare exceptions, like Aspasia, are often reduced to whispers in the historical record, their brilliance overshadowed by the male luminaries of the day. But wait, there's more to this cultural tapestry. The symposium is also a place where cultural achievements are both celebrated and critiqued. The walls echo with the recitation of epic poetry, the kind that makes Homer a household name. Music, too, plays a part, with a lyre strumming in the background, setting the mood for debates that could rival any modern courtroom drama. It's a celebration of Athenian culture, a testament to its artistic prowess and intellectual curiosity. Yet beneath the surface of this cultural reverie lies a darker reality. The wealth that funds these lavish gatherings is often built on the backs of the disenfranchised, slaves who serve the guests, metics who pay the taxes, and conquered peoples who fill the coffers of Athenian imperialism. It's a stark contrast that would make even the most ardent champion of democracy pause and question the ethical foundations of this so-called golden age. As the evening deepens, the philosophical discussions take on an existential flavor, spurred on by the wine and the flickering torchlight. Questions about fate, justice, and the divine mingle with the smoke from oil lamps, creating an atmosphere dense with introspection. These are the moments that capture the essence of Athenian thought, where the pursuit of knowledge becomes a shared journey, albeit one with barriers and blind spots aplenty. And now, as you recline in the afterglow of the symposium, it's time to reflect on the cultural achievements and contradictions of this legendary city. Athens, in all its glory and grime, is a paradox. It's a place where democracy was born, yet limited to a privileged few, where philosophical inquiry flourished, yet women and slaves were silenced. The city's legacy is as complex as its history, a blend of luminous achievements and glaring inequalities. While Athens laid the intellectual groundwork for much of Western civilization, it's crucial to look beyond the polished marble of the Parthenon and consider the shadows cast by its towering columns. The ideals that emerged from this ancient city, democracy, philosophy, art, are undeniably grand, but they existed alongside a society rife with exclusion and exploitation. It's a reminder that history is never as simple as the myths we build around it, that the stories of glory are often written on pages stained with struggle. So, as you prepare to leave the symposium and step back into the moonlit streets of Athens, carry with you the understanding that this city, like all great civilizations, was a tapestry woven from both light and shadow. Its achievements are as remarkable as its contradictions are troubling, a testament to the enduring complexity of human society. And as the echoes of ancient debates fade into the night, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of Athens, a city that dared to dream big, even if the reality sometimes fell short of the ideal. As dawn creeps over the rolling fields of Tudor England, you're already stirring in your snug little cottage, a place barely big enough to swing a cat, if you had one to swing. But hey, it's home. Your abode, constructed from wattle and daub, is as charming as it is draughty. If you're lucky, the thatched roof only leaks in a few places, which is a blessing when the English rain decides to make an appearance, which is often. The floor's a mix of packed earth and straw, which keeps things earthy, quite literally. Your day kicks off with the kind of routine that would make modern minimalists weep with envy. No alarm clocks here, just the crowing of the resident rooster, who's annoyingly punctual. As you shake off sleep, your first stop is the hearth. This isn't just a quaint fireplace, it's the beating heart of your home. It's where you cook, keep warm, and occasionally ponder life's mysteries while staring into the flames. It's also where you bake bread, that trusty staple of your diet. Forget sourdough starters and gluten-free options. This is good old-fashioned bread, made from the grain you help cultivate through sweat and possibly a few tears. Breakfast is a no-frills affair, consisting of yesterday's bread and maybe some cheese if you're really living it up. Washed down with ale, of course, because in this era, ale is basically your all-day hydration solution. The water's not exactly Evian, and besides, ale's got nutrients, or so they say. Food-wise, life is a bit of a repetitive playlist. Bread, pottage, and ale form the holy trinity of your diet. Meat's a luxury, unless you're poaching rabbits on the sly, risking the wrath of the landowner. That landowner, by the way, is someone you definitely don't want to annoy. They hold all the cards, or more accurately, the land deeds. You're a cog in the grand machine of the open field system, the medieval precursor to community gardening, albeit with way more rules and less Instagrammable moments. Your role in the open field system is as predictable as it is vital. You and your fellow villagers work long strips of land, which rotate crops to keep the soil happy and productive. It's a communal effort, a bit like a neighborhood co-op, but instead of sharing kombucha, you're sharing manure duties, and tools, and probably grumbles about the weather and taxes. Speaking of taxes, those are a real joy. The Crown has a way of making sure you never forget your contribution to the greater good, through regular tithes and taxes that remind you just how little you actually own. It's a bit of a running joke that the peasants are always one harvest away from financial ruin, except it's not really that funny when it's your life. By now, you're ready to head out to the fields, where your real work begins. It's a life of labor, no doubt, but it's also one that ties you closely to the rhythms of nature. You know the seasons like the back of your calloused hand and can predict the weather better than any Tudor weatherman, should such a thing exist. The work is back-breaking, sure, but there's a certain satisfaction in seeing a field go from barren to bountiful. So, there you are, standing on the cusp of another day in the life of a Tudor peasant. It's a world of simple pleasures and harsh realities, where life is hard, but not without its charms. You're not weighed down by the complexities of modern life, but you're also not burdened with the luxury of choice. It's a delicate balance, one that you navigate daily with a mix of grit and good humor. Whether you find solace or sorrow in this way of life depends on the day, the weather, and perhaps how much ale you've had by breakfast. As you lace up your boots, ready to face the world outside your humble abode, you're greeted by the familiar sight of your fellow villagers, each heading to their designated strip of land like a medieval conga line. The task at hand varies by the season, but let's say it's springtime, the prime time for sowing. This isn't a leisurely stroll through the English countryside. This is down and dirty work. You've got seeds to plant, and they won't sow themselves. Now let's talk tools. Forget your fancy mechanized plows of today. Meet the heavy plow, your best frenemy. This beast is the medieval equivalent of a tractor, minus the horsepower and air conditioning. It's a massive contraption, usually pulled by a team of oxen, and it's as heavy as it sounds. We're talking about a wooden frame with a sharp iron cutting edge, designed to dig deep into the soil. You and your neighbors take turns wrestling with it, sweating buckets as you guide it through the fields. It's a communal effort, a bit like a medieval CrossFit class, only you're building biceps and sore backs instead of six-packs. As the plow cuts through the earth, you feel a strange mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. This is your connection to the land, a bond forged through toil and a fair bit of cursing. But then there's the economic side of things. You're not just working for love of the land, you're working to survive. Your obligations are plenty, starting with the tithe, a charming little 10% cut of your produce that goes straight to the church. And then there's the rent you owe to your landlord, because even in the 16th century, rent is non-negotiable. It's a constant reminder that while you might work the land, you don't own it. By mid-morning, you're knee-deep in mud, sweat trickling down your brow. It's not all bad news, though. The communal nature of the labor means you're never alone. The fields echo with the chatter and laughter of your fellow peasants, sharing gossip as readily as they share tools. There's a certain camaraderie in shared hardship, like a medieval reality show minus the cameras and drama. Speaking of drama, let's tackle the myth of pastoral bliss head-on. Sure, the idea of living close to nature sounds idyllic, sun-dappled fields, birdsong, all that jazz. But here's the reality check. It's back-breaking work. You've got blisters forming on blisters, and the sun's more likely to singe you than kiss your skin. The romantic notion of a simple life fades faster than your energy levels after a day in the fields. Yet, despite the grime and grind, there's a certain rhythm to it all. The land has its own tempo, dictated by the seasons. You sow in spring, weed in summer, harvest in autumn, and in winter you try not to freeze. It's a cycle as predictable as the coming of taxes, which, by the way, are always looming. The Crown's appetite for revenue knows no season, and you're reminded of this as you count out your hard-earned produce to meet your obligations. By the time you've finished sowing, the sun is high in the sky, signaling a break. You gather with your neighbors for a quick bite, likely more bread washed down with ale. It's a moment to catch your breath, swap stories, and maybe even share a joke or two. The laughter is genuine, a brief respite before you return to the grind. Now, let's not forget the other half of your toolkit, the flail. This two-handed implement is your go-to for threshing, which is the medieval way of separating the wheat from the chaff. It's a repetitive, rhythmic motion, like an ancient dance, only instead of a partner, you've got bundles of grain. It's back-breaking, but there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the results of your labor pile up. As you work, you can't help but ponder the bigger picture. This is your life, dictated by the whims of weather and the demands of those above you. You're a vital cog in the Tudor economy, but you're also painfully aware of your place in the social hierarchy. There's little room for upward mobility, and your future is as set as the sun on the horizon. But despite the hardships, there's a resilience here, a determination to make the best of what you have. The fields might not hold the promise of wealth, but they offer a different kind of richness, a connection to the land, to each other, and to the cycles of nature. It's a life of toil and tithes, of rents and resilience. And as the day wears on, you find yourself settling into that rhythm once more, ready to face whatever the afternoon might bring. As the afternoon sun takes its sweet time meandering across the sky, you and your fellow villagers settle down for the midday break. This isn't just a pit stop, it's the Tudor equivalent of a social media feed. Here, amidst the chatter and laughter, you get the latest updates on who's doing what with whom, and why it might be scandalous. It's like a live-action soap opera, only with more dirt and less glamour. Your midday meal is as predictable as the sunrise: bread, pottage, and ale. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This is a culinary experience in its own right. The bread is a dense, hearty affair, perfect for soaking up the flavors of pottage, a thick stew made from whatever's on hand. Think veggies, beans, maybe a bit of bacon if the butcher was feeling generous. It's a dish that's as adaptable as a Swiss Army knife, changing with the seasons and the availability of ingredients. Ale, of course, is the drink of choice, doubling as refreshment and social lubricant, helping the conversation flow as smoothly as the drink itself. Now, let's dive into the sociology of the table. The communal meal is more than just sustenance. It's an event, a moment where the village hierarchy subtly but unmistakably reveals itself. Those with a few extra coins, or perhaps a cozy relationship with the landlord, get the best spots and maybe a slightly more generous helping. It's a chance to see who's rising and who's just trying to keep their head above water. After all, in a world where social mobility is about as likely as a unicorn sighting, status matters. Speaking of status, let's talk religion. In Tudor England, the church is more than just a place of worship. It's the epicenter of village life, the gravitational pull around which your existence orbits. Sundays are reserved for Mass, and not attending isn't really an option unless you fancy a hefty fine or a public shaming. The church calendar dictates the rhythm of your weeks with saints, days sprinkled in like confetti at a particularly pious party. Each saint's day brings a break from work, which is a welcome reprieve, although it's less about leisure and more about religious obligation. Superstition, too, has its place in your daily routine. Ever wonder why people knock on wood? That's a habit rooted in times like these, when every creak and shadow could be a sign from the supernatural. You might keep a sprig of rosemary in your pocket to ward off evil spirits, or throw a pinch of salt over your shoulder to blind the lurking devil. It's these little rituals that pepper your life with a sense of control, a way to tip the scales in your favor when the odds feel stacked against you. Now let's debunk a charming little myth, the so-called golden age of the peasant. It's a story that paints your life in sepia tones, a nostalgic fantasy of simplicity and pastoral bliss. But here's the reality check. It's not all golden sunsets and rolling meadows. Sure, there are moments of joy and camaraderie, but there's also relentless labor, unpredictable weather, and a feudal system that's as unyielding as the clay-heavy soil you till. The feudal hierarchy is a ladder with few rungs, and you're likely stuck on the bottom one. Your lord owns the land, and you rent a small plot. In return for this privilege, you owe a portion of your harvest and a good chunk of your time to his service. It's a system that's as ancient as it is effective, keeping the power dynamics firmly in place. The romantic notion of a self-sufficient peasant life is just that, a notion largely divorced from the gritty reality of your day-to-day existence. Yet there's resilience here, a thread of determination that weaves through the fabric of village life. Your connection to the land is profound, a relationship forged through toil and tempered by the cycles of nature. It's a bond that's both humbling and empowering, grounding you in a world that can feel capricious and unpredictable. As the midday break draws to a close, you rise from your seat, brushing crumbs from your tunic. The fields await, and with them the continuation of your laborious dance with the land. It's a rhythm you know well, one that's as much a part of you as the calluses on your hands. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the village, a reminder that the day is far from over. Your place in this medieval tapestry is both small and significant, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who work the land and weather the storms. It's a life that's neither golden nor grim, but somewhere in between, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of relentless challenge. As you return to the fields, you carry with you the stories and laughter of your fellow villagers, a shared history that binds you together in a world that's ever-changing and unyielding. So there you are, ready to face the rest of the day with the same mix of grit and humor that sustained you through countless seasons. It's a life lived at the mercy of nature and the whims of those above you. But it's your life, shaped by the choices, traditions, and realities of a world that's both familiar and foreign. And as the afternoon sun begins its descent, you find yourself once again caught in the eternal cycle of work and rest, hope and hardship. As the afternoon sun dips ever so slightly, you know it's time to switch gears. It's not a day for lounging about or contemplating life's mysteries. There are animals to tend and tools to fix. Welcome to the second act of your day, where variety is the spice of life, or at least the spice of survival. First up, let's talk livestock. If you thought pigs were just walking slabs of bacon, think again. These guys are your organic garbage disposals, happily munching on scraps and leftovers. They're also your future protein buffet, if you can afford to spare one. As you head to the sty, you might be joined by your spouse and children, because let's face it, everyone pitches in. The idea that medieval peasant life was a testosterone-fueled solo endeavor. Total myth. Women and kids are not just side characters in this saga, they're central to the plot. Women, in particular, are the unsung heroes of this era. They're out here milking cows, feeding chickens, and sometimes even ploughing fields if manpower is short. Multitasking. That's a Tudor specialty. And let's not forget the kids, those pint-sized apprentices who start learning the ropes almost as soon as they can walk. By age 7, they're already contributing to the household economy, fetching water, gathering firewood, and helping in the fields. It's a family affair, long before Vin Diesel made it cool. Now, back to those tools. The medieval toolbox is as much about muscle as it is about metal. You've got your trusty sickle for harvesting and a mattock for digging, but these aren't self-maintaining. Enter the blacksmith, the medieval equivalent of tech support. If you're not in the mood to schlep over to his forge, you might try your hand at basic repairs yourself. A broken hoe doesn't fix itself, after all. And when your plowshare's looking more like a paperweight, it's time for some elbow grease and ingenuity. But let's hit pause on this pastoral picture and address another myth, the one about medieval filth. Yes, hygiene wasn't quite at today's standards. There's no Dove soap or electric toothbrushes here, but it wasn't all mud and muck either. People washed regularly, often in streams or rivers, and they even had soap made from animal fat and wood ash. Sure, it's not exactly a spa day, but it's a far cry from the dirt-encrusted stereotype. Clothing, too, was washed with surprising frequency, given the lack of modern conveniences. If you think washing machines are a pain, try scrubbing your tunic by hand in cold water. Speaking of tunics, let's dive into some medieval fashion. Your everyday wear is practical and durable. Think wool or linen, tailored to withstand the rigors of daily life. You might own a couple of sets, one for working and another for Sundays, when you try to look your best for church. And no, everything wasn't just a drab, muddy brown. Natural dyes offered a splash of colour. Reds from madder, yellows from weld, and blues from woad were common, giving you a bit of flair even while knee-deep in manure. Now, about those rare moments of leisure. Life might be a grind, but it isn't all toil and no play. Feast days and festivals are your social lifeline, a chance to let loose and maybe even do a little jig. The village green is transformed into a medieval party zone, complete with dancing, music, and more ale than you could shake a stick at. It's like a mini vacation from the daily drudgery, a reminder that life isn't all about survival. Community events offer another dimension to your existence, providing not just diversion, but a sense of belonging. Marriages, baptisms, and even funerals are big deals, occasions that bring the entire village together. These gatherings aren't just social, they're crucial for maintaining the bonds that hold your community together. As the day winds down, you find yourself reflecting on the rhythm of life. It's a mix of constancy and change, of predictability and surprise. You're part of a vast tapestry, woven with threads of duty, tradition, and the occasional splash of rebellion. It's a life defined by the land, shaped by the seasons, and punctuated by the human need for connection and community. So, as the shadows lengthen and the day edges toward twilight, you take a moment to appreciate the small victories. A tool repaired, an animal fed, a family fed. The world may be harsh, but it's also rich with moments that remind you why you endure. And just like that, the cycle continues, as predictable and unyielding as the setting sun. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to come tomorrow. After all, this story is far from over. As the sun finally dips below the horizon, casting the village in a soft twilight glow, you shuffle back home, leaving behind the fields that have demanded your sweat and perhaps a few choice words throughout the day. But the work isn't quite over yet. This is the pivot point in your day, the transition from outdoor toil to indoor chores. So, what's next on the agenda? Supper, of course, and a chance to gather with your family around the hearth, that sacred space where the day stories are swapped as eagerly as bits of bread. Supper in Tudor England is not the Instagram-worthy spread of today's farm-to-table dining. Forget about avocado toast and quinoa salads. Your dinner is a hearty affair of bread, pottage, and whatever garden produce is in season. Meat makes a rare appearance, reserved for special occasions or when a hunt proves successful. But what's a meal without a drink? Ale comes to the rescue once again, complementing the rustic flavors and perhaps softening the edges of a long day. It's like a Tudor nightcap, minus the sophistication. Here, in the warmth of your home, the evening unfolds in a way that's as traditional as it is timeless. This is where storytelling takes center stage, a form of entertainment as old as time itself. Forget Netflix and TikTok. Your entertainment is live and unfiltered. You gather around, perhaps with a few neighbors, and dive into tales that have been passed down from generation to generation. Maybe it's a ghost story, something to send shivers down your spine as the wind howls outside. Or perhaps it's a fable with a moral, a cautionary tale that reminds the young ones to listen to their elders. Each story is a thread in the rich tapestry of oral tradition, woven with lessons, humor, and a touch of the fantastical. But let's not romanticize too much. Storytelling is a necessity, not just a quaint pastime. It's how knowledge is passed along in an era where books are as rare as unicorns, and literacy is a luxury. You learn about your history, your customs, and the world beyond your village through these tales. It's education wrapped in entertainment, and it's crucial for keeping the community connected. Now, if we peel back the layers of this quaint picture, we find the harsh reality lurking beneath. The stories you tell and hear are also a reflection of the economic and social pressures that weigh on your shoulders. They're a way to make sense of a world where the crown's taxes are always looming, where your life is dictated by the whims of the weather and the demands of those above you. It's a reminder that while you might find joy in the simple pleasures, your life is a constant balancing act of survival and submission. You see, when you strip away the bucolic veneer, the life of a Tudor peasant is far from idyllic. It's a world where every day is a battle against the odds, where you're always one bad harvest away from ruin. The open field system, while communal, is also a constant reminder of your lack of ownership. You work the land, but it's not yours. You reap the harvest, but a good chunk of it isn't for your table. And yet you persist, driven by necessity and perhaps a stubborn sense of hope. As the fire crackles and the stories wind down, you find yourself reflecting on your day. It's a microcosm of Tudor society itself, a blend of tradition and toil, of resilience and resignation. You're part of a hierarchy that's as rigid as the social norms that govern it. But within that structure, you carve out a life that's uniquely yours, defined by family, community, and the land you call home. And so, as the evening draws to a close, you prepare to retire for the night. Your bed is a simple affair, likely a straw mattress shared with your spouse and maybe a child or two. There's no luxury here, just the comfort of familiarity and the promise of rest. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew, and with it, the challenges and triumphs of another day. As you drift off to sleep, you might allow yourself a moment of reflection. The life of a Tudor peasant is neither wholly romantic nor entirely grim. It's a nuanced existence, shaped by forces beyond your control, but also by your own choices and actions. It's a life that demands resilience, creativity, and an unwavering sense of community. In the end, the legacy of the Tudor peasant is one of perseverance. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and adapt, to find joy in the midst of hardship, and to build a life that, while humble, is rich in its own way. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the gentle sounds of the night, you carry with you the knowledge that your story, like the stories of those before you, is an integral part of a larger tapestry, woven with the threads of history, humanity, and hope. If you picture a philosophical giant like Confucius, you might imagine a serene old man stroking his beard while pondering life's mysteries in some grand temple. But toss that image aside for a minute. Rewind back to 551 BCE in the small state of Lu, which is essentially smack dab in the middle of what we now call Shandong Province, China. This is where Confucius, or Kong-Qiu as he was originally known, makes his grand entrance into the world. Spoiler alert, his beginnings are less wise sage and more plucky underdog. Born into a family that was noble, but down on its luck, Confucius started life with a modest backdrop. His father, Kong-He, was a military officer of some repute, but not exactly swimming in riches. His untimely death when Confucius was just 3 left the family even further in the lurch. Enter Yan Zhengzi, Confucius's mother, a woman of formidable resilience and a knack for teaching her son about life's essentials. Talk about making lemonade out of lemons. In a world where women were often expected to keep quiet, she made sure her son's mind was anything but. Confucius was a curious child, perpetually poking around for knowledge like a cat with a new toy. Despite the family's financial struggles, he was determined to learn. This wasn't your typical eat your veggies type of persistence. Think more along the lines of a squirrel hoarding nuts for the winter. He devoured knowledge wherever he could find it, and his mother's teachings laid the groundwork for what would become his lifelong obsession with learning and morality. Fast forward a few years, and we find young Confucius in his teenage years, eager to make a living. Forget about any notions of a cushy first job. Confucius started as a low-level bookkeeper. Yes, you heard that right, a bookkeeper. While today that might not sound like the most riveting gig, in ancient China, it was a step up from ploughing fields or selling turnips. Numbers were his game, and he was good at it, but let's just say he wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests with his teachers. Picture the student who asks too many questions in class, and you've got Confucius. His teachers probably rolled their eyes more than a few times. Confucius's early life highlights something crucial. The dude was relentless. Poverty, no problem. Social snobbery, bring it on. He had a burning desire to understand the world better than anyone else, and he wasn't afraid to ruffle a few feathers to get there. His first job may not have screamed future philosopher, but it laid the foundation. Handling accounts and managing records taught him discipline and the importance of keeping things in balance, a lesson that would stick with him as he moved from numbers to nuanced thoughts on ethics and governance. The so-called humble beginnings of Confucius weren't just a picturesque backdrop for his later achievements. They were the crucible of his character. In a society that valued birthright over ability, he dared to chart his own course, armed only with intellect and an unwavering moral compass. So next time you think about Confucius, don't just envision the wise old sage. Remember the scrappy kid from Lu, who wasn't afraid to question the status quo, even when it meant being the odd one out. As Confucius grew older, his relentless curiosity transformed into a full-blown intellectual expedition. Armed with nothing more than a hunger for wisdom and perhaps a well-worn pair of sandals, he set off across the fractured landscape of ancient China. Now, this wasn't your modern-day road trip with GPS and a playlist of top hits. Oh no, crossing a state line back then was like stepping into a parallel universe, each kingdom with its own set of rules, languages, and let's not forget, quirky rulers who would rather wage war than listen to unsolicited advice on governance. In a time when travel meant bumping along on a cart or hoofing it on foot, Confucius visited as many as 14 different states. That's like a cross-country tour, minus the luxury of roadside diners or comfy motels. He was a one-man think tank, trying to peddle his ideas on ethics and moral governance to anyone with a throne and a listening ear. Spoiler alert, the listening part was often in short supply. Picture this. Confucius, dusty from the road, stands before a ruler whose idea of a good time is a solid afternoon of power consolidation. Our philosopher pitches his vision of a government based on virtue and benevolence. The ruler, probably stroking his beard and contemplating the next military campaign, might have thought Confucius was a tad naive. After all, virtue doesn't exactly pay for the kingdom's defenses or keep rival states from playing a game of medieval risk. Despite his best efforts, Confucius's proposals often fell flat. He was like a door-to-door salesman trying to sell snow to Eskimos. Only the snow was a radical idea about harmony, and the Eskimos were rulers who preferred the tried-and-true method of ruling with an iron fist. You can almost hear the collective sighs of exasperation as Confucius, undeterred, moved on to the next state. But let's clear up one thing. The image of Confucius as an all-knowing sage who always had the answers is a bit of a myth. Sure, he was wise, but he was also human, subject to the same frustrations and setbacks as the rest of us mere mortals. His travels were peppered with moments that were more facepalm than eureka. Imagine pitching your life's work to a king who nods along, only to reply with something along the lines of, "That's nice, but how does it help me crush my enemies?" Confucius wasn't deterred by these setbacks. They only fueled his quest for knowledge. Each failed pitch was a lesson learned, each rejection a stepping stone. He refined his philosophies like a blacksmith sharpens a blade, honing them through experience and reflection. His journey was less of a straight line, and more of a meandering path filled with detours and dead ends, but each twist and turn added depth to his understanding. Now, let's talk economics because, let's face it, ideals are great, but they don't fill the coffers. Confucius's ideas often faced the harsh reality of economics. Rulers were primarily concerned with maintaining their wealth and power, and while Confucius's emphasis on moral integrity was admirable, it didn't offer immediate financial gain. In a world where might often made right, the appeal of ethical governance was about as attractive as a tax audit. Yet, Confucius wasn't just a dreamer detached from reality. He understood the importance of practical governance and social order. He believed that a ruler's virtue would inspire the same in their subjects, creating a harmonious and prosperous society. But convincing a ruler to prioritize virtue over immediate economic gain, that was a tall order, akin to asking a modern CEO to prioritize employee happiness over quarterly profits. Despite these challenges, Confucius left an indelible mark on the rulers he met. His travels were like ripples on a pond, spreading his ideas far and wide. Though he may not have seen his vision realized in his lifetime, his teachings slowly took root, influencing generations long after his sandals had worn out. Confucius's journey was a testament to the power of perseverance and the pursuit of knowledge. He may have been met with skepticism or outright dismissal, but his unwavering belief in the value of wisdom and virtue kept him moving forward. His travels weren't just a quest for knowledge, they were a testament to his resilience and conviction. In every interaction, he left a piece of himself, sowing the seeds for a legacy that would outlast the empires of his time. So, the next time you hear the name Confucius, don't just picture the wise old sage. Remember the tireless traveler, the idealist with dusty sandals, who dared to dream of a world governed by virtue and wisdom, even if the world wasn't quite ready for it. His quest may have been fraught with challenges, but it was this very struggle that forged the philosopher we know today. A man who, despite his failures, succeeded in planting the seeds of thought that would grow into the towering tree of Confucian philosophy. But let's not kid ourselves. Confucius's story is far from the simple tale of a wise old man in a robe dispensing nuggets of wisdom like fortune cookies. His ideas weren't just theoretical fluff. They were designed to address the kind of chaos that makes a modern-day traffic jam look like a Zen retreat. Let's dive into the core of Confucius's philosophy, virtue, or as he called it, Ren, which is pronounced something like Ren if you're trying to sound sophisticated at a dinner party. Ren is often translated as benevolence or humaneness, but it's more about the quality of being a decent human being, like not cutting in line at the coffee shop. Confucius believed that the cultivation of Ren was the key to a harmonious society. He wasn't just daydreaming about a utopia. He was addressing the very real social disintegration that plagued his time. Picture ancient China not as a unified empire, but as a patchwork quilt of warring states, each ruler eyeing the next like cats at a fish market. The political climate was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. In this environment, Confucius proposed that if rulers embodied Ren, their subjects would follow suit, leading to a trickle-down effect of virtue. It was like hoping that if the CEO starts recycling, everyone else will too. Now, you might wonder why Confucius thought this would work. Well, he wasn't just pulling ideas out of the ether. He observed that when leaders acted with integrity, it inspired loyalty and moral behavior among their people. It's the same principle behind why companies today plaster motivational quotes all over the office walls, as if seeing "teamwork makes the dream work" will magically turn every meeting into a productivity powerhouse. But Confucius didn't stop at virtue. He also preached morality and propriety, known as Lai, which was all about rituals and social etiquette. And no, this wasn't just about knowing which fork to use at dinner. Li was about maintaining social order through proper conduct, ensuring everyone knew their role and acted accordingly. Imagine if everyone in a city suddenly forgot how to drive. Chaos, right? Li was Confucius's way of preventing societal gridlock. Yet, for all his noble intentions, not everyone was lining up to give Confucius a high five. Some rulers thought his ideas were more trouble than they were worth. You see, Confucius was like that friend who tells you to eat kale and meditate when all you want is a cheeseburger and Netflix. His insistence on virtue and morality was a bit of a buzzkill for rulers who preferred the good old-fashioned method of ruling by fear and force. Who needs virtue when you have a well-armed cavalry? The political climate of the time was a minefield of intrigue and power struggles. Rulers were more concerned with expanding their territories and fortifying their defenses than with philosophical musings on ethics. In this cutthroat world, Confucius's ideas were seen by some as naive, even subversive. After all, a ruler who embraced virtue might appear weak or indecisive to rivals itching for a takeover. Confucius's push for moral governance was like trying to sell a vegetarian menu at a steakhouse. Sure, it's healthier, but when everyone's craving a T-bone, it's a tough sell. Yet Confucius held firm, convinced that a virtuous leader would naturally command respect and loyalty from their subjects, fostering a stable and prosperous society. It was a long-term strategy in a world obsessed with short-term gains. Despite the skepticism, Confucius's teachings weren't without influence. His ideas simmered beneath the surface, slowly permeating the cultural consciousness like a spicy hot pot. Over time, even the most hard-headed rulers couldn't ignore the benefits of a harmonious society. Some began to see the appeal of governance based on virtue, not because they suddenly turned into saints, but because it was a practical solution to societal chaos. In a world where everyone seemed to be shouting over each other, Confucius was the calm voice of reason. He offered a blueprint for a society where people acted with integrity and respect, where rulers led by example rather than by decree. His philosophies were not just abstract ideals, but practical solutions to the chaos of the warring states period. Confucius was like the ancient world's social engineer, designing a system where virtue was the cornerstone of stability. His ideas provided a roadmap for transforming a fractured society into a cohesive one. And while he may not have lived to see it fully realized, his teachings laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Confucian tradition, a tradition that would shape Chinese culture for centuries. So, next time you're navigating the complexities of modern life, remember that Confucius was doing much the same over 2 millennia ago. He was grappling with questions of how to lead a life of virtue and morality in a world that often seemed indifferent to such ideals. His journey was one of relentless pursuit of wisdom, a testament to the belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the power of ideas can transform societies. As we continue to explore Confucius's legacy, let's not forget that his teachings were more than just ancient proverbs. They were, and still are, practical tools for navigating the complexities of human relationships and governance. Confucius didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk, trudging through the political quagmire of his time with nothing but a vision of a better world, and maybe a pair of worn-out sandals. His story is far from over. It's a narrative that continues to unfold, teaching us new lessons with each passing generation. And so, as Confucius's teachings began to seep into the cultural consciousness like ink on a blotter, he decided it was time to head back to his roots. Yep, our man was returning to Lu. Picture a returning home not as a triumphant hero, but as a philosopher with a to-do list longer than a dragon's tail. This wasn't some grand parade with trumpets and fanfare. It was more like a weary traveler with an endless checklist of reforms. Confucius, now in his 60s, was back in Lu with a head full of ideas and a heart full of hope. But as any seasoned bureaucrat will tell you, hope doesn't exactly grease the wheels of government. The state of Lu wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for Confucius's reform plans. Instead, he found himself knee-deep in the kind of bureaucratic red tape that would make even the most hardened DMV employee break a sweat. Picture him trying to introduce ethical governance in a system more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. Despite these hurdles, Confucius didn't just sit around twiddling his thumbs. Instead, he turned his focus to education, a domain where he could wield influence without needing a ruler's blessing. And so he started what might be dubbed the world's most exclusive and expansive school. With just 72 disciples who were his inner circle, Confucius managed to teach about 3,000 students. Yes, you heard that right. 3,000. That's like running a one-room schoolhouse and a university at the same time. Now, let's debunk a myth. Confucius wasn't some lone, say, dispensing wisdom at will. He was more like an overworked principal trying to manage a bustling campus with a skeleton crew. His disciples assisted him in spreading his teachings, ensuring the curriculum didn't just include philosophical musings, but practical knowledge as well. From history to music, ethics to governance, Confucius's syllabus was like the ancient world's liberal arts degree, minus the crippling student debt. But before you get too misty-eyed about this noble pursuit of education, let's remember the economic context. The state of Lu, like many others, was strapped for cash. The treasury wasn't exactly overflowing, and the economic stability was as shaky as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. Confucius wasn't just teaching for the love of it. He understood that education was a way to instill the virtues he so passionately preached. He believed that if he could mold the next generation, he could indirectly shape the future of governance in China. Talk about playing the long game. Yet, Confucius's return to Lu wasn't all academic bliss and philosophical musings. His so-called golden years were more like a comedy of errors, complete with political intrigues and awkward diplomatic dances. Imagine trying to implement a code of ethics in a court that valued cunning over candor. The rulers of Lu were not exactly chomping at the bit to adopt his reforms. After all, old habits die hard, especially when those habits involve power games and political maneuvering. Our philosopher found himself in a constant tug-of-war with the powers that be, like trying to play chess with someone who insists on using checkers rules. Despite his best efforts, Confucius's attempts at reform often faced resistance from those who saw his ideas as a threat to their authority. Change, as it turns out, was not on the menu for the ruling class, who were more interested in maintaining the status quo. It's as if the state of Lu was saying, thanks, but no thanks, to Confucius's grand vision of ethical governance. Yet, the old sage was nothing if not persistent. While he might not have succeeded in transforming Lu into a utopia, his ideas began to take root in the hearts and minds of his students. Through them, he hoped to influence the wider world, a world that, in his later years, seemed as chaotic and unyielding as ever. He knew that the seeds he was planting would take time to germinate, that the fruits of his labor might not be seen in his lifetime. So you might ask, were these really Confucius's golden years? Well, that depends on your definition of golden. If you're thinking of a peaceful retirement, lounging by a pond while students fan you with palm leaves, think again. Confucius's later years were filled with the same challenges and frustrations that had defined much of his life. He was constantly battling against the tide, trying to instill a sense of virtue and morality in an often indifferent world. But let's not paint too grim a picture. There were moments of levity and success. Confucius's teachings gained traction among the people, even if the rulers were slow to catch on. His return to Lu marked a period of significant intellectual activity, where he continued to refine his ideas and spread his philosophy. It was a time of both struggle and fulfillment, as he worked tirelessly to lay the groundwork for future generations. Confucius's later years highlight the reality that even the greatest thinkers aren't immune to the frustrations of human endeavor. He faced opposition, experienced setbacks, and dealt with the kind of bureaucratic headaches that would make anyone else throw in the towel. Yet, through it all, he remained steadfast in his belief that virtue and wisdom were the keys to a better society. So, as we leave Confucius in this stage of his life, surrounded by students and scrolls, grappling with the complexities of governance and education, let's not sugarcoat his legacy. His later years were far from a serene swan song. They were a testament to his unwavering commitment to his ideals. Confucius wasn't just a philosopher. He was a man of action, striving to make a difference in a world that often seemed resistant to change. And with that, we'll pause this chapter of Confucius's journey, leaving him in the midst of his educational revolution, still fighting the good fight. As we look to the next part of his story, remember that the seeds he planted in Lu would eventually grow into the towering pillars of Confucian thought, shaping not just China, but the entire world. But that's a tale for another time. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the unfolding saga of Confucius and the legacy he left behind. As we continue the saga of Confucius, let's fast forward a couple of centuries to see how his teachings actually managed to elbow their way into prominence. We're talking about the Han Dynasty here, which kicked off around 206 BCE, long after Confucius had shuffled off this mortal coil. By then, his ideas were like those old vinyl records that suddenly become cool again, dusty but classic. The Han emperors were dealing with the kind of chaos that makes a soap opera look like a day at the spa. They needed something to bind their sprawling empire together, a glue stronger than duct tape. Enter Confucianism, stage left, as the ideological superglue. The Han rulers were no fools. They recognized the utility in Confucius's emphasis on hierarchy and order. So they decided to give his ideas a test drive, and voila, Confucianism became the official state philosophy. Now, don't imagine this as an overnight success story. Confucius didn't skyrocket to philosophical stardom like a pop idol. His teachings were more like a slow-burning candle, gradually illuminating the dark corners of imperial policy. By the time Emperor Wu of Han, the reigning boss from 141 to 87 BCE, put Confucianism on the throne, it was clear that Confucius had finally found his audience, albeit posthumously. Confucian ideals became the backbone of the civil service exams, a system that shaped China's bureaucratic landscape for over 1,000 years. Talk about a legacy. If you wanted a cushy government job, you had to master Confucius's texts. The Analects became the ancient equivalent of a must-read management book, with quotes like, "To see what is right, and not do it is want of courage," being the kind of wisdom you'd slap on a motivational poster. The exams weren't just about rote memorization. They instilled a Confucian ethos in the ruling class that emphasized merit, moral integrity, and social responsibility. It was like the ultimate boot camp for bureaucrats, molding them into paragons of virtue, or at least that's how it looked on paper. But let's not gloss over the irony here. Confucius spent his life knocking on the doors of power, only to be met with blank stares and polite refusals. Yet, in death, he became the poster boy for the very system that ignored him. It's the ultimate cosmic joke, isn't it? The man who couldn't catch a break while alive suddenly becomes the philosophical darling of an entire empire. It's like being the nerd who gets picked last for dodgeball, only to end up coaching the team to victory after graduation. Now you might be thinking, sure, Confucius became a big deal in China, but what about the rest of the world? Well, his influence didn't stop at the Great Wall. Fast forward to the present day, and Confucius's ideas have spread far beyond China's borders. In a world grappling with issues of ethics, governance, and social harmony, his teachings have found renewed relevance. Whether it's discussions around ethical leadership or debates on the role of morality in public life, Confucianism continues to offer valuable insights. It's like that old pair of jeans that never goes out of style, fitting just right even as the decades roll by. Yet, let's not kid ourselves into thinking Confucius's rise to fame was seamless. The path from obscure philosopher to global icon is littered with misconceptions and romanticized narratives. The myth of Confucius as the all-knowing sage who had it all figured out is just that, a myth. His brilliance wasn't in offering ready-made solutions, but in asking the right questions, challenging the status quo, and daring to dream of a better society. It's a bit like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. You might not get it right every time, but you'll definitely learn a thing or two along the way. Confucius's teachings, with their emphasis on introspection, empathy, and social responsibility, resonate in today's fast-paced, often impersonal world. They remind us that the real measure of success isn't just in personal achievements, but in contributing to the collective good. It's a message that cuts across cultures and eras, offering a timeless roadmap for navigating the complexities of human relationships. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Confucius's life and legacy, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of his vision. He was a man who dared to imagine a world where virtue, not power, was the currency of governance, a revolutionary idea in any age. And while he may have been dismissed in his time, his ideas continue to challenge and inspire us, proving that the power of thought can indeed transcend the limits of time and space. In the end, Confucius's story is a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in a world rife with challenges and contradictions, the pursuit of wisdom and virtue remains a noble and necessary endeavor. So the next time you find yourself pondering life's big questions, take a cue from the old sage of Lu. Keep questioning, keep learning, and never, ever stop striving for a better world. And with that, we close the book on Confucius, not as a distant historical figure, but as a timeless guide for navigating the complexities of life. His teachings continue to echo through the corridors of history, inviting us to reflect on our own values and aspirations. As we bid farewell to the philosopher who walked his own path, let's carry forward his legacy of seeking wisdom, fostering empathy, and striving for harmony in an often chaotic world. In the grand theatre of World War II, where the stakes were as high as they could get, Winston Churchill entered stage left in his dressing gown, literally. It's May 10, 1940, and as Nazi forces storm through Europe at a speed that would make a Formula One driver blush, Britain's government is in disarray. Neville Chamberlain, the man who thought appeasement was a winning strategy, has finally thrown in the towel. Enter Churchill, a man whose political career had more ups and downs than a yo-yo champion's practice routine. Churchill wasn't exactly the first-round pick for Prime Minister. In fact, he was more like the dark horse that nobody bet on until the last possible moment. The guy had a reputation. He was that eccentric who drank champagne with breakfast and still managed to be the sharpest mind in the room. The British public was skeptical, to say the least. I mean, would you trust a guy who wore a sarin suit, a kind of zip-up onesie, as war leader? Yet, on that fateful May Day, Churchill was thrust into the spotlight, ready or not. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Churchill's initial popularity was about as robust as a soggy biscuit. His own political party, the Conservatives, weren't exactly throwing confetti at his appointment. Some thought he was too aggressive. Others remembered his less-than-stellar track record. Like that ill-fated Gallipoli campaign during World War I, which went about as well as a lead balloon. But Churchill had a knack for turning skepticism into support, and his response to being underestimated was quintessentially British. Keep calm and carry on, preferably with a cigar in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. If there's one thing Churchill had in spades, it was eccentricity. The man loved to work from bed, often dictating orders to his secretaries while lounging in his dressing gown. This sartorial choice wasn't just a quirk. It was practically a uniform. A 1941 Life magazine article even featured Churchill in his romper suit, as they called it, highlighting a leader who was equal parts formidable and flamboyant. It was as if Churchill knew that in times of crisis, when everyone else was buttoned up and anxious, appearing a bit relaxed, albeit in a rather unorthodox way, was the ultimate power move. So why did any of this matter, you ask? Well, Churchill's peculiar style was more than just an entertaining footnote. It was a reflection of his larger-than-life persona that both charmed and confounded those around him. While his contemporaries might have been stifled by protocol and stiffness, Churchill's approach was refreshingly different. He had the uncanny ability to blend gravitas with humor, delivering speeches that could rally a nation even as the Luftwaffe rained down bombs on London. Speaking of speeches, let's not forget his debut as Prime Minister in the House of Commons. On May 13, 1940, just 3 days after taking the reins, Churchill gave his first speech to Parliament. It wasn't one of those air-a-fairy, everything's going to be okay pep talks. Instead, he famously offered blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Quite the motivational poster, isn't it? But that's what made Churchill so effective. He didn't sugarcoat the harsh realities of war. Instead, he faced them head-on, with a bulldog determination that resonated with a nation on the brink of despair. Of course, Churchill's leadership wasn't all about speeches and sartorial choices. The political landscape he inherited was as unstable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The British Expeditionary Force was retreating from Dunkirk. Europe was succumbing to Nazi domination, and Britain's resources were stretched thinner than the plot of a soap opera. Yet Churchill managed to galvanize the country through sheer force of will and a strategic mind that was always 2 steps ahead. Behind the scenes, Churchill's working habits were, let's say, unconventional. His day often started at 8 a.m. and would stretch until the early hours of the next morning. He was a night owl, frequently hosting war cabinet meetings in the dead of night. Some might call that insomnia. Churchill called it dedication. And let's not forget his penchant for long baths during which he continued to dictate memos. The man was a multitasking marvel long before it became a buzzword. The truth is, Churchill wasn't just fighting a war against the Axis powers. He was battling public opinion, political rivals, and sometimes even his own allies. He was a man of contradictions, part aristocrat, part commoner, part rebel, part establishment. Yet it was this very complexity that made him the right leader at the right time. When the world was spiraling into chaos, Churchill provided a steady, albeit quirky, hand on the wheel. In the end, Churchill's rise to power was a testament to his resilience and ability to adapt. He navigated the turbulent waters of political chaos with a blend of strategic acumen and personal charisma that few could match. And while his methods might have been unorthodox, even downright bizarre at times, they were undeniably effective. As Britain faced its darkest hour, it was led by a man who was anything but ordinary, a leader who understood that sometimes the key to survival wasn't just in the grand strategies, but in the small, eccentric details that kept hope alive. And so, as the sun set on a nation gripped by uncertainty, Churchill's eccentricity was more than just a charming quirk. It became a beacon of resilience. Now, let's delve into the real meat and potatoes of his leadership, the speeches. Oh, those speeches. If Churchill's leadership was the engine, then his speeches were the fuel that kept it running. These weren't just words thrown together to fill the silence. They were verbal symphonies, orchestrated to rally a nation teetering on the edge. Take, for instance, the legendary "We Shall Fight on the Beaches" speech. Delivered on June 4, 1940, this oration was more than just a call to arms. It was a masterclass in stirring rhetoric. With phrases designed to echo through the annals of history, Churchill painted a vivid picture of defiance. Yet let's not pretend it was all sunshine and rainbows. The reality was far grimmer. The British Expeditionary Force had just been evacuated from Dunkirk in what was less a victory and more a desperate retreat wrapped in a silver lining. Over 300,000 troops were snatched from the jaws of annihilation, but the cost was steep. Nearly 70,000 British soldiers were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner during the campaign. Churchill knew the power of words, but he also knew their limitations. His speeches were like the soundtrack to a disaster movie. Rousing, yes, but they didn't change the fact that the house was on fire. Behind the eloquent phrases lay a stark truth. Britain was fighting for its very survival, and the Dunkirk evacuation, while hailed as a miracle of deliverance, was a tactical retreat at best. Yet Churchill's words turned a military catastrophe into a symbol of resilience, a classic case of turning lemons into a stiff gin and tonic. His speeches offered a thick layer of poetic gloss over harsh realities. Consider the economic context. Britain was financially stretched, with war expenditures soaring to £5.5 billion by 1945, equivalent to roughly £240 billion today. That's more zeros than you'd find in a room full of mathematicians. Rationing was in full swing, with butter and bacon becoming distant memories for the average Brit. But Churchill's words served as a balm, soothing the populace, even if they couldn't fill empty stomachs. However, let's not fall for the myth that Churchill's speeches single-handedly won the war. This was no Hollywood script where a rousing monologue saves the day. The speeches weren't magical incantations that conjured victory from thin air. Instead, they played a crucial role in fortifying British morale, a vital ingredient in the recipe for eventual triumph. While soldiers fought in the trenches, Churchill spoke to the hearts of the civilians, transforming them into unwitting soldiers in the war effort. It's worth noting that Churchill's gift for the gab wasn't always appreciated in real time. Believe it or not, the House of Commons wasn't always a sea of nodding heads and applause. After his blood, toil, tears and sweat speech, reactions were mixed. Some MPs were so underwhelmed they thought the speech might have been improvised on the spot. Yet, history would prove them wrong, as his words would gain legendary status, much like a musician whose album flops on release, but later becomes a cult classic. And let's not forget the impact on the civilian populace. Britain was bombarded by the Blitz, a sustained campaign that saw over 40,000 civilians killed and more than 1 million homes destroyed by 1941. The toll on the British psyche was immense. Churchill's speeches offered a lifeline, a reminder that while the physical landscape was being reshaped by devastation, the spirit of the nation remained unbroken. His rhetoric was like a verbal air raid shelter, providing refuge from despair. But let's not kid ourselves. Churchill's speeches were more poetic than pragmatic. Lines like, "We shall fight on the beaches," sound great in a speech, but aren't exactly a blueprint for military strategy. It wasn't as if the British were setting up beach volleyball nets and planning for a seaside skirmish. The reality was, fighting on the beaches was a last resort, a desperate measure if all else failed. Yet the poetry of his words was precisely the point. They were meant to inspire, not instruct. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of Churchill's rhetoric, but let's not overlook the harsh truths. Britain faced a formidable enemy in Nazi Germany, and the road to victory was fraught with peril. Churchill's speeches were the narrative backbone of a nation under siege, providing a sense of purpose amid chaos. Yet they were only one part of a complex tapestry of war. A war that involved not just stirring speeches, but also strategic alliances, technological innovations, and sheer human resilience. The myth of Churchill as the lone voice leading Britain to victory is just that, a myth. His speeches were a vital component of the war effort, but they were part of a broader coalition of factors. Let's give credit where it's due. The resilience of the British people, the contributions of the Commonwealth, and the eventual support of the United States were equally crucial in turning the tide. But Churchill's speeches, with their poetic flair and defiant tone, served as the rallying cry that kept the nation moving forward, one step at a time. As we peel back the layers of myth and examine the gritty reality beneath, it's clear that Churchill's speeches were more than just words. They were the heartbeat of a nation in its darkest hour. Yet they were not a panacea. They were a reminder of what was at stake, and a call to arms for a country that refused to bow down. In the grand tapestry of history, they stand as a testament to the power of language to inspire, to unite, and to keep hope alive in the face of overwhelming odds. But as we shall see, Churchill's leadership was not solely defined by his oratory prowess. There was much more to this complex figure, and the story of his wartime leadership is far from over. Now, as we dive into Churchill's role as a strategic maestro, or perhaps a mad conductor with a penchant for improvisation, let's talk about some of his more eyebrow-raising decisions. The man wasn't just about rousing speeches and cigars, after all. He had a wartime playbook that was part genius, part what on earth was he thinking? And nowhere is this duality more evident than in the Norwegian campaign of 1940, which had echoes of his earlier disastrous Gallipoli venture during World War I. Gallipoli. It's a name that still sends shivers down the spine of military historians. Back in 1915, Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, was convinced that opening a new front against the Ottoman Empire would be a game-changer. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The campaign was a spectacular flop, resulting in over 100,000 casualties and a strategic stalemate that made even the most optimistic planners wince. The Gallipoli debacle was like trying to open a coconut with a feather duster, ambitious, but ultimately doomed. Fast forward to April 1940, and Churchill, now with the weight of the world on his shoulders as Prime Minister, decided to test his luck once more in Norwegian waters. The aim was to secure iron ore supplies and deny them to the Nazis. The operation was a logistical nightmare, akin to planning a wedding and a divorce on the same day. The British Expeditionary Force landed in Norway amidst confusion and chaos, with poor coordination and inadequate support making it more of a farce than a fistfight. The result? An echo of Gallipoli's failure, with the campaign lasting just 2 months before the British were forced to retreat. The cost of this misadventure? Roughly 4,000 British casualties and a blow to the Allies' strategic position in Scandinavia. It was a sobering reminder that Churchill's bulldog tenacity sometimes led him to charge headlong into the proverbial china shop, leaving more broken crockery than tangible results. Yet, here's the rub. For all his blunders, Churchill's strategic decisions weren't just the whims of a cigar-chomping eccentric. They were often calculated risks, gambles taken in the desperate hope of finding a breakthrough. His leadership was marked by a willingness to take chances, to roll the dice even when the odds seemed stacked against him. This audacity sometimes paid off, but it also meant that Churchill's war record was far from spotless. Of course, Churchill's strategic gambles weren't made in a vacuum. Behind the scenes, political maneuvering was as intense as any battlefield skirmish. The War Cabinet was a hotbed of debate, with Churchill often clashing with his chiefs of staff and other government officials. His leadership style was, shall we say, less consensus-building and more my way or the highway. He was known for his fiery temper and forceful personality, traits that could either galvanize or alienate those around him. In the case of the Norwegian campaign, the political fallout was immediate and severe. The operation's failure led to a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. Churchill's predecessor, Neville Chamberlain, finally stepped down, and Churchill's position as Prime Minister was solidified, albeit in the most precarious of circumstances. It was a classic case of a crisis creating opportunity, a political baptism by fire that left Churchill both scorched and strengthened. Now, let's not get carried away by the myth of Churchill as an infallible wartime leader. The truth is, his strategic decisions were a mixed bag, with some proving brilliant and others bordering on catastrophic. Yet, the myth persists, in part because Churchill's larger-than-life persona and unparalleled oratory skills overshadowed the more mundane details of military logistics and strategic blunders. This brings us to the economic context of Churchill's strategic choices. The war effort was a financial black hole, with Britain's national debt ballooning to 250% of GDP by the end of the conflict. To put it in more relatable terms, if Britain were a modern-day millennial, it would be living off credit cards while trying to pay student loans, rent, and a monthly subscription to every streaming service under the sun. The economy was stretched thinner than a hipster's patience in a Starbucks line. Yet, Churchill's charisma and leadership kept the country focused on the bigger picture. He knew that winning the war required not only military might, but also economic resilience and public support. His decisions, controversial as they were made with an eye toward sustaining morale and maintaining momentum, even when the immediate outcomes were less than stellar. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Churchill's leadership during World War II was a fascinating blend of brilliance and blunder, of calculated risks and unforeseen consequences. His strategic decisions, though sometimes flawed, were driven by a relentless determination to secure victory at any cost. His legacy is a complex tapestry of myth and reality, a reminder that history is often as much about the stories we tell as the facts themselves. As we continue our exploration of Churchill's wartime leadership, we'll delve deeper into the paradox of a leader who was both celebrated and criticized, revered and reviled. We'll see how his decisions shaped not only the outcome of the war, but also the course of history itself. And while the story of Churchill's leadership is far from over, what we've seen so far is a testament to the power of boldness in the face of adversity. a lesson that resonates as much today as it did in those tumultuous days of the early 1940s. As we wade deeper into the mire of World War II and Churchill's complicated dance with diplomacy, let's shine a spotlight on his tete-a-tetes with two of the era's most formidable leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin. Picture it as a historical buddy movie if the buddies were occasionally at each other's throats over existential stakes. First, let's chat about FDR. Their relationship began with a cautious curiosity, but quickly evolved into a strategic bromance. In the early days, Britain was practically on its knees, and Churchill knew he needed a lifeline, preferably one with stars and stripes. Enter the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. This was Roosevelt's ingenious workaround to support Britain without dragging an isolationist America into war. It was like borrowing your neighbor's lawnmower and promising to return it in mint condition. Only the lawnmower was $31 billion worth of military aid. To put that in perspective, that's about $400 billion in today's dollars, enough to buy the whole neighborhood's lawnmowers and a couple of Rolls-Royces for good measure. But their interactions weren't just about dollars and cents. Churchill and Roosevelt shared a remarkable camaraderie, often marked by humorous exchanges. Take their 1941 meeting in Newfoundland aboard the USS Augusta and HMS Prince of Wales, where they drafted the Atlantic Charter. While the world was on the brink, these two statesmen shared drinks and stories like old college pals at a reunion. Churchill, ever the night owl, reportedly had Roosevelt's staff scrambling to keep up with his nocturnal hours, a testament to his tireless, if eccentric, work ethic. Yet this wasn't a friendship without friction. Roosevelt, with his easy charm and political acumen, sometimes had to play the mediator to Churchill's more bullish tendencies. Churchill, for his part, was known to test the limits of patience. He famously quipped, "The Americans will always do the right thing after exhausting all the alternatives." It's the kind of backhanded compliment only a true friend could get away with, or a world leader desperately clinging to survival. Now, let's shift gears to Stalin, the man who made Churchill look like a kitten in comparison. The British bulldog had to navigate a relationship with the Soviet leader that was less like a buddy movie and more like negotiating with a very hungry bear. From the outset, Churchill was wary of Stalin. Who wouldn't be? Stalin had a penchant for purges and a glare that could freeze lava. But necessity, as they say, is the mother of strange bedfellows. The Yalta Conference in February 1945 was a prime example of Churchill's balancing act. Here he sat at the table with FDR and Stalin, hammering out post-war plans. Picture it as a high-stakes poker game, where each player had their own agenda, and the chips were the future of Europe. Churchill was sandwiched between Roosevelt, who was increasingly frail, and Stalin, who was as inscrutable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. At Yalta, the trio discussed the fate of post-war Europe, the formation of the United Nations, and the thorny issue of Poland's borders. Churchill was acutely aware that Stalin had a vested interest in expanding Soviet influence, particularly in Eastern Europe. Yet, with Britain's resources stretched thinner than a fashion model's waistline, Churchill had limited leverage. It was like trying to negotiate a peace treaty with a bear while holding nothing more than a honey pot, sweet intentions, but not exactly a game changer. The economic strains behind this unity were immense. Britain, despite its stiff upper lip, was financially exhausted. By the war's end, it owed the United States and Canada over £3 billion, a debt that would take decades to repay. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union had suffered catastrophic losses, with an estimated 27 million lives lost. That's not just a statistic. It's a tragedy of staggering proportions, underscoring the desperate need for cooperation, however uneasy. Yet, amidst these somber realities, there were moments of levity. At Yalta, Churchill reportedly quipped that meeting with Stalin was akin to taking a bear by the tail. And true to form, Stalin responded with a wry smile, perhaps appreciating Churchill's audacity, or maybe just contemplating the British leader as a potential appetizer. As for Roosevelt, his declining health was a concern. The once vibrant president was now visibly frail, relying on aides for support. Churchill, ever the pragmatist, recognized that FDR's absence from the global stage would leave a vacuum, one that Stalin was more than eager to fill. Though Churchill and Roosevelt had their disagreements, the bond they shared was a crucial pillar of the Allied effort. Behind the scenes, the Allied unity was more of a balancing act on a tightrope than a harmonious choir. Each leader had their own priorities, shaped by political pressures, economic constraints, and the harsh realities of war. For Churchill, the challenge was to maintain this fragile alliance while safeguarding Britain's interests, a task akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? Churchill's diplomatic maneuvers were a testament to his adaptability and tenacity. In FDR, he found a partner who could offer support and camaraderie. In Stalin, he faced a formidable challenge that required deft negotiation and strategic compromise. The Yalta Conference was a microcosm of this complex interplay, a reminder that even in the darkest times, diplomacy was as much about personalities as policies. Yet, let's not sugarcoat it. The myth of seamless Allied cooperation is just that, a myth. Churchill's leadership during these negotiations was marked by compromise and concession, often out of necessity rather than choice. The reality was messy, fraught with tension, and driven by the pressing need to end the war and forge a precarious peace. As we continue to unravel the enigma that was Churchill's wartime leadership, let's remember that history is not just a tale of great men and their triumphs. It's a tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice, strategy, and the occasional stroke of luck. Churchill's ability to navigate these turbulent waters, to maintain alliances while managing egos and expectations, was a feat of diplomacy that deserves both admiration and scrutiny. And while the story of Churchill's wartime leadership is far from over, what we've seen so far is a testament to the power of adaptability in the face of adversity, a lesson that resonates as much today as it did in those pivotal days of the early 1940s. As we look ahead, there are still more layers to peel back, more myths to debunk, and more insights to uncover. So stick around, because this historical ride isn't slowing down anytime soon. All right, we've navigated through Churchill's wartime waltz with diplomacy, so let's fast forward to the years after the confetti settled. The Allies had won. The iconic V for victory was a global symbol, and Churchill was the man of the hour. But spoiler alert, peacetime wasn't as kind to him as his war years had been. Picture it like this. The curtain falls, the lights dim, and instead of a standing ovation, the audience starts murmuring about the next act. In 1945, as Churchill was basking in the glow of victory, the British public had other plans. The general election that year was his political Waterloo. Despite his wartime heroics, the British electorate handed him a resounding defeat, opting for Clement Attlee and the Labour Party. Why, you ask? Well, the British people were ready for a change, a move from wartime grit to peacetime reconstruction. They wanted social reform, jobs and welfare, not just rousing speeches and cigars. Churchill, it seemed, was the right man for a crisis, but not for the calm after the storm. His tenure ended with a political thud rather than a bang. The post-war landscape was a jigsaw puzzle missing a few crucial pieces. Britain was emerging from the war financially battered, with national debt soaring to a staggering 250% of GDP. The austerity measures implemented made post-war Britain feel less like a victorious nation and more like a university student living on instant noodles. Rationing continued well into the 1950s, a stark reminder that victory didn't come with a side of prosperity. Churchill's political decline post-1945 highlighted a harsh truth. Being a wartime leader doesn't automatically translate to peacetime success. His focus on international diplomacy and security, while vital during the war, didn't align with the immediate domestic needs of a country yearning for housing, healthcare, and employment. The electorate's shift towards Labour wasn't just a rejection of Churchill personally. It was a pivot towards policies that promised a welfare state and economic recovery. Yet, Churchill wasn't one to sulk in the shadows. He spent his time out of office writing, painting, and unsurprisingly, plotting a comeback. True to form, Churchill made a political return in 1951, becoming Prime Minister once again at the ripe age of 76. His second term was marked by efforts to solidify Britain's nuclear capabilities and navigate the early days of the Cold War. However, it lacked the dramatic flair of his wartime leadership. The world had moved on, and while Churchill was still a formidable figure, the challenges of the 1950s demanded a different kind of leadership. Despite the ups and downs, Churchill's post-war years cemented his status as a symbol of British resilience. His image became entwined with the very essence of grit and determination, a bulldog spirit that resonated even as the world changed around him. But let's peel back the layers of myth here. The romanticized version of Churchill often glosses over his complex legacy. A man who, despite his brilliance, had his fair share of flaws and failures. His views on empire and race were often at odds with modern sensibilities, and his stubbornness could border on obstinacy. Yet it's this very complexity that fuels Churchill's enduring appeal. He embodies the paradox of leadership, a man who could inspire with words even when his policies faltered, who could unite a nation in its darkest hour, yet struggle to adapt in peace. His legacy isn't just about what he did, but how he did it, with a mix of audacity, charisma, and a touch of eccentricity. For modern leaders, Churchill's story offers a treasure trove of lessons. One key takeaway: adaptability is crucial. Churchill's inability to shift gears from wartime to peacetime cost him dearly in 1945. It's a reminder that the skills that make one successful in one context might not apply in another. Another lesson: the power of communication. Churchill's speeches were more than just words. They were a strategic tool that galvanized a nation. In an age where sound bites often overshadow substance, his example underscores the importance of rhetoric that not only informs but inspires. And let's not forget the value of resilience. Churchill's career was a masterclass in bouncing back. Whether it was recovering from the Gallipoli disaster or his electoral defeat, he showed that setbacks were merely setups for comebacks. It's a testament to the power of perseverance, even when the odds resemble a particularly brutal game of Monopoly. As we wrap up this historical ride, it's clear that Churchill's legacy is as multifaceted as the man himself. He was a leader who thrived on challenge, whose charisma and determination left an indelible mark on history. Yet, he also reminds us that heroes are human, full of contradictions and complexities. Churchill's story is a reminder that history is not just about victories and defeats, but the intricate dance between myth and reality, a tale that continues to captivate, educate, and inspire. So, as you file this away in the mental Rolodex of history lessons, remember, the past is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we can prove. And in the grand narrative of history, Churchill remains one of its most compelling chapters. In the grand pageant of history, the feudal system often gets the star-studded Hollywood treatment. Knights in shining armor galloping across lush fields to rescue damsels, and kings lounging in opulent castles. But let's peel back the velvet curtain and see what's really going on behind the scenes of this medieval hit parade. Spoiler alert. It's less about chivalric romance and more about land, loyalty, and a medieval version of the gig economy that kept Europe ticking for centuries. At its core, the feudal system was a pyramid scheme with a dash of Game of Thrones drama. It was all about land, a scarce yet crucial resource. Picture a sprawling chessboard where every piece, from pawn to king, was holding on for dear life to their patch of earth. The king, perched at the top, technically owned all the land. But here's the twist. He parceled out chunks of it to his most trusted nobles in exchange for military service, and occasionally a decent party. These nobles, the barons and lords, didn't just sit around polishing their family crests. They had their own game of musical chairs to play. Each lord would further divide his land among vassals, who were basically medieval middle managers. In return for their slice of the pie, these vassals promised to show up with a small army whenever the lord had a turf war or felt a little insecure about his borders. But wait, there's more. This entire system was propped up by the serfs, essentially the unsung heroes of the Middle Ages. They were the farmers, the labourers, the backbone of the feudal economy. Picture them as the medieval gig workers, tilling the lord's land from dawn until, well, just before the next dawn. In return, they got protection, think medieval insurance policy, a plot to grow their own food, and the privilege of paying a chunk of their produce as rent. Feudalism. The original rent-to-own scheme, but with less paperwork and more mud. Now, let's talk economics because, believe it or not, the feudal system was less about valiant knights and more about cold, hard cash, or whatever passed for currency back then, like bushels of wheat or livestock. The land was the economic engine, and everything revolved around it. Owning land meant power, and power meant you could demand taxes, labor, and loyalty. We tend to forget that those castles weren't just architectural marvels. They were the original tax offices, strategically placed to oversee the land and its people. Speaking of castles and knights, let's debunk the myth of the noble knight. Yes, they wore armor and charged into battle, but they were also landowners looking to expand their assets. Becoming a knight wasn't just about honor and glory, it was a career move. You didn't just become a knight because you looked good in chainmail. It required substantial investment. Armory didn't come cheap, and neither did the horses, which were the medieval equivalent of a sports car. A decent warhorse could cost anywhere from 15 to 50 shillings, a small fortune for most folks. Moreover, the romantic image of knights as selfless protectors is as glossy as a medieval romance novel. In reality, they were more like enforcers, ensuring that the peasants paid their dues and didn't get any wild ideas about upward mobility. They were the muscle behind the lord's power, and not above a bit of roughhousing to keep the serfs in line. And speaking of those serfs, let's chat about their lives, because who doesn't love a good dose of medieval misery to spice up the storytelling? The average serf's life was a grind, quite literally. They worked the land from sunup to sundown, with little reward beyond survival. They were bound to the land, not quite slaves, but certainly not free. Unlike the romanticized visions of pastoral bliss, serfdom was a hard, thankless job with limited prospects for change. Here's a fun fact. A serf could technically buy his freedom, but given that they were paid in kind and not coin, this was about as realistic as a dragon showing up at the harvest festival. Freedom was more of a theoretical concept than an actual possibility for most. The feudal system was a well-oiled machine, but not without its quirks and pitfalls. It thrived on personal relationships, oaths of fealty, and a sense of mutual obligation that was as binding as any contract. The system relied heavily on the honor and loyalty of its participants, a risky business model if ever there was one. But for all its flaws, it provided a semblance of order in a world where chaos was just a Viking raid away. Feudalism wasn't just a social structure. It was the medieval version of a startup, with all the hustle, hierarchy, and hope that implies. From the king's lofty perch to the serf's muddy field, everyone played their part in this grand, intricate dance. And like any good drama, it was full of ambition, betrayal, and the occasional jousting tournament. As we continue to peel back the layers of this medieval onion, remember, the feudal system wasn't just about castles and knights. It was a complex, often brutal, and surprisingly human endeavor that shaped the course of history. So next time you think of the Middle Ages, don't just picture the gallant knights and grand castles. Picture the people behind the legends, the lords, the vassals, the serfs, each playing their part in the greatest game of all, survival. But let's pivot from the knights and castles for a hot minute and dig into the gritty reality of the medieval serf. Because these folks were the unsung MVPs of the Middle Ages, grinding away in the fields while the upper crust played their high-stakes game of land monopoly. Now, if you think being a serf was all about ploughing fields and paying taxes, hold onto your ploughshares. It was that, and oh, so much more. First, let's tackle the idea of rights in the medieval sense. Spoiler alert. Serfs didn't have many. They were bound to the land, a fancy way of saying they couldn't just pack up and leave for greener pastures. The lord of the manor had more say over their lives than they did. But here's the kicker: they weren't slaves either. They had a few basic protections. For instance, their lord couldn't just kill them on a whim, which is a pretty low bar for workers' rights. But hey, it was the Middle Ages. Now, about those infamous tithes. Serfs were expected to fork over a portion of their produce to their lord and another share to the church. The church's cut was usually 1/10 of the harvest, hence the term tithe, from the Old English word for 10. It's like living in a tax haven where the taxman shows up every harvest. And if you thought the IRS was relentless, try dodging a medieval monk with a ledger. Then there's the delightful concept of corvée labor. Picture this. After a long week tending your own plot, your lord calls you up for some unpaid overtime, working his land or repairing the local infrastructure, like roads and bridges. Corvée labor was essentially feudal community service, minus the orange jumpsuits. This labor wasn't just a one-off. It was a regular expectation, a few days a week during peak seasons. So yes, serfs got to enjoy all the fun of a side hustle without any of the benefits. But wait, there's some good news, or at least less bad news. Medieval village economies were surprisingly complex. Serfs weren't just mindless drones in a field. They participated in a local economy that involved trading goods and services, bartering what little extra they had for other essentials. Villages operated like tiny economies, with their own social dynamics and networks. Think of it as a medieval version of Etsy, with fewer knitted scarves and more hand-forged plowshares. Social dynamics within these villages were a study in communal cooperation and competition. While everyone was in the same muddy boat, social hierarchies still existed. Some serfs climbed the social ladder, becoming reeves or headmen, overseeing the work of their fellow villagers. It was a small step towards upward mobility, albeit with a ceiling made of dirt. And speaking of dirt, let's address the elephant in the room, medieval hygiene, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was a bit like the Loch Ness Monster, often talked about, rarely seen. Bathing was an infrequent luxury, and the concept of sanitation was still a twinkle in the Enlightenment's eye. Serfs made do with what they had, which wasn't much. Communal living meant that diseases spread faster than gossip after Sunday Mass. The Black Death didn't need a marketing team. It had a population with no immunity and even less understanding of hygiene. But let's not get too bleak. Amid the mud and toil, there was community. Despite their hardships, serfs often celebrated life with the little they had. Feast days were a big deal, an excuse to put down the plough and pick up a tankard. Festivals broke the monotony and were moments of joy in an otherwise grueling existence. Even the church, with its insatiable appetite for tithes, played a role in these celebrations, organizing events that brought the community together. So next time you hear about the feudal system, remember the serfs, the medieval everyman and everywoman, who kept the whole show running. They lived hard lives, but they found ways to carve out moments of humanity and joy in a world where those were in short supply. And while they might not have had the glamorous armor or sprawling estates of their lords, they were the backbone of medieval society, the original blue-collar workers of history's grand narrative. As we continue our journey through the annals of feudalism, let's keep peeling back the layers of this historical onion, revealing more about the lives of those who lived under its watchful eye. There's more to explore, from the intriguing tapestry of medieval justice to the economic forces that would eventually reshape the landscape. But for now, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the serfs, the unsung heroes of the Middle Ages, who remind us that history is as much about those who lived in the shadows as those who strutted in the spotlight. Stay tuned. There's more history to uncover, and trust me, it only gets more fascinating from here. Now that we've given the serfs their well-deserved spotlight, let's cast our eyes upward to the folks who were calling the shots from their drafty stone fortresses, the lords of the manor. These guys were essentially the medieval equivalent of corporate executives, wielding power and influence with a curious mix of ambition and anxiety. Their lives weren't just a series of banquets and hunting trips. It was more like a high-stakes game of chess where every move could make or break their fortune and future. First things first, castle life. Forget the fairy tale image of castles as luxurious palaces adorned with silk tapestries and bustling with merry courtiers. Sure, the tapestries were there, mostly to keep out the cold drafts, but medieval castles were more akin to fortified military bases than cozy homes. They were designed for defense, not comfort. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, and labyrinthine corridors perfect for confusing invaders, but also a nightmare for finding the loo in the middle of the night. Inside these stone behemoths, life was a curious blend of duty and downtime. Lords were expected to manage their estates, which involved overseeing everything from agricultural production to local justice. They held court, quite literally, in the great hall where disputes were settled and justice was dispensed. Picture Judge Judy, but with more chainmail and possibly fewer gavel bangs. But it wasn't all work and no play. Lords knew how to throw a party, and feasting was an integral part of castle life. These weren't your average backyard barbecues, though. Medieval banquets were lavish affairs, with courses that would make a modern tasting menu look like a snack pack. Roasted meats, exotic spices, and gallons of ale and wine were the order of the day. And while the lords and ladies dined on peacock and swan, yes, swan, the lower ranks made do with pottage and bread. Then there were the tournaments, those grand spectacles that Hollywood loves to romanticize. In reality, they were less about chivalry and more about showcasing strength and skill. Part sporting event, part reality TV, tournaments were where knights could win fame and, more importantly, fortune. Winning a tournament could earn a knight valuable prizes or even the favor of a wealthy patron, a medieval version of landing a lucrative endorsement deal. But let's not kid ourselves. Behind the pageantry, these were brutal affairs. Imagine a football game where everyone's got swords and you're halfway there. Now, let's delve into the political juggling act these lords had to perform. Their allegiance to the king was often more of a balancing act than a straightforward loyalty. Medieval politics was a tangled web of alliances and rivalries, where today's friend could be tomorrow's enemy. Lords had to be shrewd operators, navigating their way through shifting power dynamics while keeping one eye on their own ambitions and the other on the throne. This precarious balance of power was further complicated by the rise of the mercantile class and the gradual shift in economic power from land to trade. As towns and cities grew, fueled by commerce and the burgeoning middle class, the once dominant lords found their influence challenged. They couldn't rely solely on agricultural wealth anymore. The economic landscape was changing, and with it, the rules of the feudal game. The lords' power wasn't just threatened by external forces, internal dynamics played a significant role too. Succession disputes, family feuds, and the ever-present threat of rebellion meant that a lord's power was never entirely secure. History is littered with tales of ambitious sons, scheming wives, and disgruntled vassals plotting from within. The medieval soap opera was alive and kicking, complete with all the drama and intrigue you could want. As power dynamics shifted, the not-so-chivalrous nature of these lords came into sharp focus. The chivalric code, while romanticized as a noble set of ideals, was often more honored in the breach than the observance. Lords might pay lip service to ideals like honor and loyalty, but the reality was often a cutthroat world where might made right. The line between defender and oppressor was thin, and many lords were as feared by their own people as by their enemies. So, as we peel back the layers of medieval lordship, we find a world that was far from the romanticized vision of noble knights and chivalrous deeds. It was a world of power plays, strategic marriages, and the constant threat of betrayal. Yet, amidst the intrigue and ambition, there were moments of genuine loyalty and courage. Lords who protected their people, knights who upheld their oaths, and castles that stood as symbols of strength and stability in a turbulent world. But let's not wrap it all up just yet. We're only partway through this exploration of feudal life, and there's plenty more to uncover. The lords might have been the power players of their day, But they were just one part of the grand tapestry that was medieval Europe. Stay tuned as we dig deeper into the economic and social forces that would eventually reshape this world and lead to the decline of the feudal system. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that nothing lasts forever, especially not when there's a Black Death or a peasant's revolt waiting in the wings. As medieval Europe teetered on the brink of transformation, you'd think the lords would have enough on their plates with squabbling heirs and rebellious serfs. But surprise. Enter the church, stage left, wielding spiritual authority like a medieval Jedi with a penchant for politics. If you thought this tale of castles and chaos was just about earthly power, think again. The church wasn't just blessing babies and giving last rites. It was the original influencer, shaping politics with a cross in one hand and a scepter in the other. Now, let's talk numbers, because the church wasn't just a spiritual entity. It was a landowner with holdings rivaling any king. By the 13th century, the church owned about a third of the land in Western Europe. That's a lot of real estate for an institution supposedly focused on the heavenly afterlife. This land translated into power, and with power came influence. Bishops were not just religious leaders, but political heavyweights, often sitting on the king's council and whispering holy advice or not-so-holy political strategies. Speaking of political strategies, let's not forget the Crusades, those legendary military expeditions that were less about piety and more about power plays. Pope Urban II kicked off the First Crusade in 1095, calling for Christian knights to reclaim the Holy Land. But here's the twist. It was also a convenient way to channel the restless energy of landless knights who were causing more trouble at home than an unsupervised toddler in a candy store. The Crusades were like a medieval road trip, albeit with more bloodshed and fewer roadside diners. Over several centuries, these campaigns drew thousands of knights and nobles across Europe into the Middle Eastern fray. The romantic narrative sold them as holy quests, but in reality, they were driven by a delightful mix of religious fervor, economic gain, and a dash of wanderlust. Knights were promised eternal salvation, but they were also eyeing the spoils of war, land, wealth, and a shot at glory. And let's not forget the convenient side effect of these crusading ventures. They helped consolidate power back home. By shipping off surplus knights to the Holy Land, European kings and lords could tighten their grip on domestic affairs without a horde of armored freeloaders clanging about, demanding land and titles. Talk about killing two birds with one crusade. Meanwhile, as the knights clashed swords with Saracens, the monarchies of Europe were busy evolving faster than a medieval Instagram influencer. The feudal system, with its patchwork of allegiances and vassal loyalties, was slowly morphing into something resembling centralized power. Kings were no longer just the top dogs in a feudal free-for-all. They were becoming symbols of national unity, with bureaucracies and tax systems to match. But don't think for a second that this transition was smooth. It was more like a medieval soap opera with shifting alliances, betrayal, and the occasional murder for good measure. Take the Angevin Empire under Henry II of England, who controlled more of France than the French king himself. This sprawling domain was a logistical nightmare, held together by a mix of marriage alliances, military might, and the sheer audacity of its ruler. Henry II's legal reforms laid the groundwork for common law, but he also had a knack for making enemies. His infamous spat with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, ended with Becket's murder in 1170, a scandal that rocked Christendom and forced Henry to do some serious public penance. The incident, a medieval PR disaster, underscored the volatile relationship between crown and church, a dynamic that would echo through the corridors of power for centuries. And if you thought that was dramatic, let's talk about the Capetian kings of France, who were busy turning their feudal kingdom into one of the most centralized monarchies in Europe. Through a combination of strategic marriages, wars, and some good old-fashioned skullduggery, they expanded royal power and territory. By the time Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, came to the throne, the French monarchy was flexing its muscles, even going toe-to-toe with the Pope over taxation and authority. But the political landscape wasn't just shaped by kings and crusades. The ever-shifting map of Europe was a testament to the tangled web of feudal allegiances. Borders were less about geography and more about the complex dance of marriage alliances, inheritance disputes, and the occasional battlefield negotiation. It was a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces were constantly being swapped, stolen, or simply lost in the chaos of war. Take the Holy Roman Empire, a political entity that was neither wholly Roman nor much of an empire, but it sure had grand ambitions. This patchwork of principalities, duchies, and city-states was a hotbed of political intrigue and regional rivalries. The emperor's power was more theoretical than actual, dependent on the cooperation of powerful princes who were about as cooperative as cats in a bath. And then there was the Byzantine Empire, the eastern bastion of Christendom, which spent much of the medieval period trying to fend off invaders, both from within and without. The Byzantine emperors were masters of diplomacy and deception, often playing Western European powers against each other while maintaining a precarious hold on their own territories. But let's not forget the real chessmasters of medieval geopolitics, the Venetians. While knights were charging into battle, the Venetians were busy building a maritime empire, trading with everyone and anyone. Their strategic location and naval prowess turned Venice into a powerhouse of commerce, its influence stretching across the Mediterranean like a well-spun spider web. The city's leaders, the doges, were less concerned with feudal loyalties and more with profit margins, showing that in the Game of Thrones, sometimes the pen and the purse is mightier than the sword. So, as we zoom out to the bigger picture, we see a European continent in flux, where the feudal system was both a stabilizing force and a catalyst for change. It influenced everything from the Crusades to the rise of centralized monarchies, shaping a political landscape that was as turbulent as it was transformative. And as we prepare to dive deeper into the next chapter of this medieval saga, remember, the story of feudalism isn't just about power and politics. It's about the people who lived, loved, and fought their way through a world as complex and colorful as the tapestries that lined their drafty stone halls. Stay tuned, because the best and the worst is yet to come. As we march deeper into the medieval twilight, the feudal system begins to unravel like a poorly knitted tunic, revealing the threads of change that would weave a new European tapestry. This isn't just a tale of castles crumbling to dust. It's about societal metamorphosis, with the Black Death, economic upheavals, and peasant uprisings acting as the unlikely catalysts in this grand historical drama. Let's start with the grim reaper of the Middle Ages, the Black Death, which swept through Europe with all the subtlety of a battering ram. From 1347 to 1351, this pandemic annihilated an estimated 25 to 30 million people, about a third of Europe's population at the time. Imagine a continent where entire villages vanished overnight, and you'll understand why this wasn't just a public health crisis, but a seismic social shift. The labor shortage that followed meant serfs suddenly found themselves with a bargaining chip, their own survival. With fewer hands to till the fields, those left standing could demand higher wages and better conditions. It was like the medieval version of the workers' union, only without the catchy chants and placards. This labor leverage didn't just shift economic power, it rocked the foundations of feudal society. Lords, once the untouchable titans of the medieval food chain, found themselves scrambling to keep their estates afloat. With fewer peasants to sow and harvest, many were forced to offer wages instead of relying solely on forced labor. It was a slow, reluctant slide into a wage-based economy, a precursor to capitalism that no one saw coming amid the death toll. And as the serfs' conditions improved, the rigid social hierarchy began to wobble like a top-heavy tower on a windy day. But let's not give the Black Death all the credit. Economic shifts were already brewing before the plague struck. The rise of trade and the growth of towns had been quietly undermining the feudal system for decades. City charters, market rights, and guilds sprouted across Europe like mushrooms after a rainstorm, creating a burgeoning middle class that didn't quite fit into the feudal framework. These were the merchants, the artisans, the people who traded in goods rather than land, and they were reshaping the economy with every transaction. Towns became the new centers of power, where wealth was measured in coin rather than acres. This urban boom was a game changer, challenging the feudal order with a different kind of prosperity that owed nothing to noble bloodlines. As trade routes expanded, so did the fortunes of those who dared to navigate them. The Hanseatic League, a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds, connected cities across northern Europe with a web of trade that was as lucrative as it was revolutionary. It was capitalism in its infancy, and it was about to shake feudalism to its core. Enter the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, a fiery testament to the growing discontent among the lower classes. In England, the poll tax, an attempt by the Crown to squeeze more revenue from its people, was the spark that ignited this explosive uprising. Led by the likes of Wat Tyler and John Ball, the peasants marched on London, brandishing their grievances like battle standards. They demanded an end to serfdom, fair wages, and an overhaul of the oppressive tax system. It was a bold, if ultimately doomed, attempt to rewrite the social contract. The revolt was crushed with brutal efficiency, but the message was clear. The old order was cracking, and the peasants were no longer content to stay silent in the shadows. The very fact that they could organize such a revolt was a testament to the shifting power dynamics. And while the immediate impact of their rebellion was limited, the long-term effects rippled through society, setting the stage for future reforms and revolutions. Now, let's debunk the glamorous myth that feudalism simply vanished in a puff of smoke one fine morning. The decline of feudalism was less a dramatic collapse and more a slow, grinding evolution. As the 15th century dawned, the system was already morphing into something new, a patchwork quilt of old traditions and new innovations. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism and individual achievement, was just around the corner, ready to sweep away the medieval mindset with the vigor of a cultural spring cleaning. Feudalism, for all its faults, had provided a framework for medieval life, a sense of order in a chaotic world. Its gradual transformation into early modern society was like watching a caterpillar turn into a butterfly, or perhaps a slightly less cumbersome creature. The emergence of nation-states, centralized monarchies, and the Renaissance's intellectual ferment all played their part in this metamorphosis. By the time the Age of Discovery rolled around, the feudal system was a relic, as outdated as a jousting lance at a gunpowder convention. So why do we still romanticize this bygone era of knights and castles? Perhaps it's the allure of a simpler world, where loyalty and honor were the currency of the realm. Or maybe it's the enduring appeal of a good story, one of chivalry, courtly love, and epic battles. But let's not forget the peasants, the serfs, the ordinary people who toiled in the background, their lives less glamorous but no less important. They remind us that history is not just about the grand narratives of kings and queens, but also about the everyday struggles and triumphs of those who lived in their shadows. As the medieval world faded into the Renaissance dawn, it left behind a legacy both tangible and intangible. The castles may still dot the landscape, but feudalism's real legacy lies in the social structures and cultural shifts it helped to shape. It was a system born of necessity, evolving out of the chaos of the post-Roman world, and it left its mark on European history in ways both profound and prosaic. So next time you see a knight in a movie or gaze upon a crumbling castle, remember the real story behind the romance. The feudal system was a complex, fascinating tapestry of power, politics, and people, woven together over centuries. It was a world where survival was a daily challenge, where the line between hero and villain was often blurred. And while we may never fully escape its shadow, we can learn from its lessons, finding new ways to balance power and justice in our own modern age. And there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the rise and fall of feudalism, a system that was as flawed as it was formative. We've journeyed from the muddy fields of the serfs to the drafty halls of the lords, from the bustling towns of merchants to the fleeting glories of knights and crusaders. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry its stories with us, not as relics of the past, but as reminders of the enduring human spirit, ever striving, ever evolving. In a world where jungles and rice paddies stretched as far as the eye could see, a remarkable empire was brewing. Forget steel and horses. This was an empire carved from the lush heart of Southeast Asia, where the monsoon rains were as much an asset as they were a nuisance. The Khmer Empire, born in the 9th century, was about to turn a humble kingdom into the powerhouse of the region. And it all started with a man named WWII, who was either a visionary leader or just had a monumental chip on his shoulder about unifying the land. I mean, who doesn't want to be the universal monarch when you've got a catchy title like that? WWII, let's call him J for short, kicked things off around 802 CE, declaring himself the Chakravartin, or King of the World, on the sacred mountain of Phnom Kulen. Talk about aiming high. This wasn't just a PR stunt, though. It was a masterstroke in political branding. By planting his flag, metaphorically, as flags weren't exactly his thing, Jay was saying he was the big kahuna and everyone else better fall in line. Think of it as the original like and subscribe campaign, but with more stone temples and fewer emojis. The Khmer Empire didn't just rise overnight because of one man's ambition. No, it took a village, or rather, dozens of them, scattered across the floodplains of the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers. These waterways were the highways of their time, vital for trade and communication, and not to mention pretty handy for growing rice. Lots of rice. We're talking enough rice to feed an army, which, coincidentally, is exactly what Jay had in mind. A kingdom needs to eat, after all. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and the empire was hitting its stride under the reign of King Suryavarman II, who clearly had a flair for the dramatic. This was the 12th century, the golden age of the Khmer, when the empire stretched across present-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, covering about 1 million square kilometers. That's roughly the size of modern-day Egypt. Not too shabby for a civilization that didn't invent the wheel. Suryavarman was the kind of guy who would have been all over LinkedIn today, constantly updating his status with achievements. He wasn't just into territorial expansion. He was about leaving a legacy. Enter Angkor Wat, the crowning jewel of Khmer architecture, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Suryavarman's reign wasn't just about erecting grand temples, although he did plenty of that. It was about cementing power in a way that would make even the most hardened Game of Thrones characters nod in approval. Alliances were forged, sometimes with a sword rather than a handshake. And as for the urban planning, let's just say Suryavarman wasn't afraid to think big. Really big. Picture this. A city with a population nearing 1 million, supported by a complex grid of canals, reservoirs, and rice paddies. It's like SimCity on steroids, but without the cheat codes. The Khmer were masters of hydraulic engineering, channeling water with such precision that even modern engineers would scratch their heads in admiration. These projects weren't just about showing off. They were essential for sustaining the massive population and the empire's expansive agriculture. And when it came to temple construction, the Khmer weren't just building places of worship. They were creating symbols of cosmic order, with the king smack dab in the center, ruling over both the earthly and the divine. But let's not romanticize too much. The Khmer Empire wasn't all sunshine and lotus flowers. There were power struggles, betrayals, and probably more than a few questionable decisions made after one too many rice wines. Even the gods they worshipped were often at odds, with Shiva and Vishnu vying for the top spot in the divine pecking order. It's like the ultimate cosmic sitcom, with a lot more incense and a lot less laugh track. Despite the occasional hiccup, the empire's leadership had a knack for bouncing back. When there were rebellions, they were quashed. When there were droughts, they dug deeper into their engineering bag of tricks. It was a constant game of whack-a-mole, with the stakes being nothing less than the survival of the empire itself. And through it all, the Khmer culture flourished, leaving behind a legacy that still resonates today. So, as we dive deeper into the saga of the Khmer Empire and its monumental achievements, Remember that behind the stone carvings and epic tales of glory, there were real people navigating a complex world. They were ambitious, flawed, and sometimes downright audacious. But hey, that's what makes history so fascinating, right? Now, let's see how these ancient architects and rulers turned their grand visions into reality, one block of sandstone at a time. The grand vision behind Angkor Wat was about as subtle as a peacock on a catwalk. Suryavarman II knew that if he was going to cement his legacy, it had to be nothing short of epic. And what better way than by building a temple that screams, "I'm the king," but in a really spiritual and sophisticated manner. This wasn't just any temple. It was the largest religious monument in the world, dedicated to Vishnu, which was a bit of a deviation from the typical Shiva worship of the Khmer kings. Talk about making a statement. Now, let's dive into the logistics, because if you think moving house is a hassle, try transporting 5 million tons of sandstone over 50 kilometers. That's like moving the weight of 1,250,000 elephants, give or take a trunk. They hauled these stones from the Phnom Kulen Mountains, which were conveniently not located next door. But hey, when you're building something meant to last an eternity, a few logistical headaches are par for the course. The Khmer didn't have the wheel, but they weren't lacking in ingenuity. They floated these colossal blocks down the Siem Reap River on rafts, probably rolling their eyes at the very thought of a wheel. Who needs one of those when you've got manpower, right? As you might imagine, building Angkor Wat wasn't just a weekend DIY project. We're talking about a labor force of thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, all working together like an exceptionally well-oiled machine. These were people who didn't just punch a clock, they chiseled away at the very concept of time. Artisans, architects, labourers, each had their part to play in this symphony of stone. It was the Middle Ages version of a blockbuster movie, with a cast of thousands, and Suryavarman was both director and star. The whole affair took around 30 years to complete, which is about the same amount of time it takes to get through your Netflix backlog. The architectural genius of Angkor Wat is enough to make even the most jaded modern architect tip their hard hat in respect. The temple is an absolute marvel of design, symmetry, and celestial alignment. Or is it? The myths around its so-called divine alignments are as plentiful as the sandstone blocks themselves. Sure, it's true that Angkor Wat is designed to reflect the Hindu universe, with its central tower representing Mount Meru, the axis of the world. But not every alignment was a cosmic conspiracy. Let's face it, sometimes a wall is just a wall, and it's facing east because, well, that's where the sun rises. Speaking of cosmic alignments, there's a romantic notion that Angkor Wat's layout mirrors the constellation Draco. While it's a lovely idea, and great for impressing a date, it's more likely that the Khmer architects were focused on creating something grand, practical, and above all, awe-inspiring. They were more concerned with earthly matters like drainage, foundation stability, and making sure the whole thing didn't collapse in a monsoon. But hey, if a bit of starry-eyed myth-making helps sell postcards, who are we to judge? Now, let's talk about the divine expectations placed on the labor force. The kings were seen as god-kings, a sort of celestial middle management, meaning their projects were not just political, but religious duties. This was a time when questioning your boss wasn't just career suicide, it was potentially literal. Imagine being a worker tasked with carving out the intricate bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat. You're not just chiseling away at stone. You're immortalizing the king's divine right to rule. No pressure, right? The bas-reliefs themselves are a masterpiece of storytelling, depicting everything from mythological battles to scenes of daily life. It's like a stone comic strip, only instead of superheroes, you've got gods and demons duking it out. These carvings are so detailed that one could spend hours, or even days, deciphering each panel. They tell stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, epic tales that would make even the most CGI-heavy Hollywood blockbuster look like a student film. But don't let the grandeur fool you into thinking this was all divine inspiration and celestial harmony. The reality was much more down to earth. The Khmer Empire was a powerhouse, but like any empire, it was built on the backs of its people. The labourers who erected this stone colossus weren't exactly working with a dental plan. They toiled in the heat, mosquitoes as constant companions, facing the very tangible risk of injury and disease. It wasn't just a devotion to the divine. It was a sheer testament to human willpower and necessity. And yet, despite the monumental challenges, Angkor Wat stands today as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of legacy. It's a place where stone whispers the stories of a bygone era, a place that inspires both awe and a healthy dose of skepticism about the myths we hold dear. As we continue our journey through the Khmer Empire, remember that behind every stone block was a pair of hands, every grand vision a human face. Stay tuned, because the story of Angkor Wat is far from over. As we peel back the layers of Angkor Wat's grandeur, it's time to reveal the economic machinery that cranked out this medieval marvel. Sure, divine inspiration sounds romantic, but let's not kid ourselves. Money makes the sandstone move. The Khmer Empire didn't just stumble upon its monumental construction frenzy. It meticulously crafted an economic juggernaut powered by rice, trade, and those ever-pesky taxes. And let's be real, nothing says civilizational success quite like a thriving rice paddy. In the Khmer Empire, rice wasn't just a staple food. Oh no, it was the cornerstone of economic stability and societal growth. Picture this. The Khmer agricultural system was more about sustainable abundance than mere survival. The empire's hydraulic engineering feats weren't just for show. They were a masterclass in agrarian efficiency. The clever folks of the Khmer knew that controlling water was akin to holding the keys to the kingdom. The monsoon rains, notorious for their fickle nature, were harnessed with an intricate network of canals and reservoirs, transforming the floodplains into a veritable breadbasket, or should I say rice basket. The numbers are staggering. At its height, Angkor could support up to 1 million people, and it wasn't because everyone was on a keto diet. The state-controlled rice fields sprawled across the landscape, ensuring the empire's granaries were bursting at the seams. These weren't just subsistence farmers scratching out a living. They were part of an agricultural behemoth, producing surplus crops that fueled trade and sustained the labor force that would construct those awe-inspiring temples. In essence, rice was the real MVP behind the Khmer's architectural triumphs. And then there was trade. In the bustling markets of Angkor, one could find goods from as far afield as India and China, not to mention the local wares. The Khmer Empire sat smack dab in the middle of major trade routes, a geographic blessing that it exploited with the acumen of a seasoned poker player. The empire's strategic location along the Mekong River and the Gulf of Thailand turned it into a commercial hub, a medieval version of a stock exchange, minus the shouting brokers. Traders would pass through, exchanging exotic items like silk, spices, and ceramics, all while filling the empire's coffers with precious metals and gems. But let's not forget the unsung hero of this economic narrative, the tax collector. Yes, the bane of every peasant's existence and the unsmiling face that turned the gears of empire. The Khmer rulers, pragmatic to the core, knew that their lavish lifestyle and grandiose projects required funding. Taxation was the tool they wielded with precision, ensuring a steady influx of resources. From rice to fish, everything was taxed, and these levies were meticulously documented in stone inscriptions, which, let's be honest, was probably the ancient equivalent of an IRS audit. This system of taxation wasn't just a money-grabbing scheme. It was a sophisticated mechanism for wealth redistribution, enabling the empire to fund public works and, of course, those massive construction projects. The monumental temples were as much a product of economic foresight as they were of religious fervor. After all, when you're building something to last an eternity, it's nice to have the budget to match. But while the gods may have been pleased with these grand tributes, the reality on the ground was far less divine. The Khmer economy, like any other, had its share of ups and downs. Mismanagement, crop failures, or a particularly nasty drought could wreak havoc, leading to famine and unrest. Imagine trying to explain to a deity why their latest temple was behind schedule, because of a little thing called economic downturn. Despite the challenges, the Khmer Empire's leadership had a knack for adaptability. They knew that flexibility was key, whether it was in managing the rice fields or negotiating trade agreements. The empire's savvy use of resources and pragmatic governance often trumped divine inspiration, keeping the wheels of progress turning even when the gods were sulking in their cosmic abodes. One could argue that the empire's focus on practicality over piety was what set them apart. While other civilizations might have built purely for spiritual grandeur, the Khmer were keenly aware of the mortal stakes involved. Their projects were as much about showcasing power and wealth as they were about fulfilling religious duties. The result was a society that thrived through a clever mix of faith and finance, built on the backs of its people, but also grounded in a very real and earthly pragmatism. As we journey further into the Khmer Empire story, remember that behind every stone block and every grandiose vision was a complex web of economic strategies and human endeavors. It's a tale of ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of legacy, one that continues to fascinate and inspire. And as much as we love the myths, it's the reality that truly captivates, where practicality met divine ambition to create something truly timeless. Stay with us as we uncover more of this ancient world's intricate dance between heaven and earth, myth and reality. With the Khmer Empire's economic engine purring like a well-fed tiger, let's swivel our attention to the spiritual smorgasbord that was the Khmer religious landscape. Imagine a world where gods weren't just celestial beings, but also career consultants for kings, taking center stage in the grand performance that was Khmer politics. From Hinduism to Buddhism, the spiritual shifts in this empire were as fluid as the Mekong River in monsoon season, each tide leaving its mark on the cultural and architectural tapestry. Now let's talk about Hinduism, the OG headliner of the Khmer spiritual scene. In its heyday, the empire's elite couldn't get enough of the Hindu pantheon, with Shiva and Vishnu often vying for the top billing in this cosmic soap opera. Picture the Khmer kings, not just as rulers but as divine intermediaries, working overtime to keep the gods appeased and the political machinery humming. It was a challenging gig, combining elements of a spiritual advisor, a politician, and let's face it, a bit of a cosmic event planner. Enter Angkor Wat, the poster child for Khmer Hinduism, built initially to honor Vishnu. This wasn't just a nod to the god, it was a full-on deification of Suryavarman II's reign. The temple complex wasn't merely a place of worship, it was a declaration of divine right, a stone-clad LinkedIn profile for the king's celestial ambitions. The central tower symbolized Mount Meru, the mythical abode of the gods, and the surrounding galleries depicted the endless cycles of creation and destruction. It was the original epic saga, carved in stone, no CGI required. But here's where the plot thickens. Despite the grandeur and the divine proclamations, the Khmer religious landscape was far from static. Picture a spiritual battlefield where Hinduism and Buddhism took turns ruling the roost, each faith influencing the empire's culture and politics in its own way. Buddhism, the plucky newcomer, began to gain traction, especially Theravada Buddhism, which promised a more personal path to enlightenment. It's like the empire's very own spiritual Netflix series, with new episodes dropping every few centuries. The shift towards Buddhism wasn't just a spiritual pivot, it was a reflection of changing political tides. As the empire evolved, so did its spiritual needs, and Buddhism's emphasis on personal salvation and ethical behavior resonated with a broader audience. It was a democratic approach to divinity, a refreshing change from the top-down hierarchy of Hinduism. This spiritual evolution mirrored the empire's own transformations, as new rulers sought to legitimize their reigns by aligning themselves with the rising star of Buddhism. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The transition wasn't all lotus flowers and serene meditations. It was more like a high-stakes game of religious chess, with kings and priests as the main players. Each shift in power was reflected in the empire's religious architecture, with temples originally dedicated to Hindu deities being rededicated to the Buddha. Angkor Wat itself, initially a bastion of Vishnu worship, eventually became a Buddhist site, its corridors echoing with the chants of a new spiritual order. This spiritual dance was as much about politics as it was about piety. Kings didn't just build temples to win divine favor. They were making strategic statements, rallying their subjects around a common spiritual cause. The gods were allies in this cosmic game of risk, and aligning with the right deity could make or break a reign. It was a bit like modern election campaigns, but with more incense and fewer attack ads. Yet, despite the power plays and divine decrees, the Khmer people remained at the heart of this spiritual saga. Their beliefs and practices provided the cultural glue that held the empire together, even as kings came and went and temples changed allegiances. For the average Khmer, religion was woven into the fabric of daily life, offering solace and structure in a world that could be as unpredictable as the monsoon rains. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The romantic notion of a seamless spiritual transition glosses over the messy, often contentious reality. The shift from Hinduism to Buddhism wasn't a peaceful handover. It was a gradual process, marked by periods of coexistence and competition. While some temples were seamlessly converted, others bore the marks of religious upheaval, their carvings a palimpsest of evolving beliefs. The Khmer Empire was a living tapestry, continually rewoven to suit the spiritual needs of its rulers and subjects. And let's not forget the role of economics in this spiritual saga. Religion was big business, and temple construction was an economic powerhouse, providing jobs and stimulating trade. The maintenance of these grand structures required a steady influx of resources, from stone and timber to skilled labor, turning the empire's spiritual pursuits into economic engines. It was a symbiotic relationship, where faith and finance went hand in hand, each bolstering the other in a dance as intricate as the bas-reliefs that adorned the temple walls. So, as we continue to unravel the complex threads of the Khmer Empire's religious tapestry, keep in mind that this was a world where faith was as much about power and politics as it was about piety. Behind every spiritual shift lay a landscape of ambition, strategy, and resilience, a testament to the enduring human quest for meaning and mastery over the divine. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this captivating tale, exploring the intricate dance between power and piety that defined the Khmer Empire's spiritual journey and left an indelible mark on its cultural legacy. As the spiritual odyssey of the Khmer Empire unfolded, the harsh realities of its decline began to cast long shadows over its glorious past. The empire, once a titan of Southeast Asia, started to unravel like a tapestry left too long in the monsoon rains. Its decline wasn't a single cataclysmic event, but a slow march towards obscurity, fueled by internal strife, environmental changes, and the shifting tides of global trade. In true historical fashion, it was a cocktail of calamities, each ingredient more bitter than the last. First, let's talk politics, because what's an empire without a little infighting to spice things up? The Khmer Empire was no stranger to power struggles. As the 13th century wore on, the royal court became a veritable battleground of ambition. Succession disputes were as common as rice, with each new ruler facing the unenviable task of keeping the nobles in line. Picture Game of Thrones, but with more elephants and fewer dragons. The constant jockeying for power eroded the central authority, turning what was once a unified empire into a patchwork of competing factions. It was a political soap opera with all the drama and none of the commercial breaks. But internal squabbles weren't the only problem. Mother Nature decided to join the fray, throwing a climate curveball that left the Khmer scrambling. The empire's agricultural system, once its greatest strength, became a liability as the climate shifted. The monsoon rains, which had reliably filled the empire's reservoirs, became erratic. Droughts alternated with catastrophic floods, wreaking havoc on the rice paddies that were the empire's lifeblood. Imagine a chef trying to make a soufflé in a wind tunnel. Consistency was not on the menu. The numbers paint a grim picture. Tree ring data from the region suggests that the 14th and 15th centuries saw unprecedented climatic fluctuations. The once thriving agricultural heartland struggled to keep up, and as the granaries emptied, so did the empire's coffers. The hydraulic infrastructure, which had sustained the empire for centuries, began to crumble under the weight of neglect and environmental stress. It was as if the very elements that had fueled the Khmer's rise now conspired to bring about its downfall. And then there was trade, or more accurately, the lack of it. The Khmer Empire had thrived as a commercial hub, strategically positioned to capitalize on trade routes between India and China. But by the 14th century, these routes began to shift, bypassing the Khmer heartland in favor of more direct sea routes. The global trade winds had changed, and the Khmer were left stranded, like a merchant ship becalmed on a windless sea. The empire's economic lifeline was cut, and with it went the resources needed to maintain its grandeur. In the midst of this unraveling, Angkor Wat stood as a silent witness, its stone walls whispering tales of a bygone era. Yet even this architectural marvel was not immune to the passage of time. As Buddhism gained prominence, Angkor Wat transitioned into a Buddhist monument, reflecting the shifting spiritual landscape of the empire. Its bas-reliefs, once vibrant with tales of Hindu gods, now bore the quiet serenity of the Buddha's teachings. The temple's evolution mirrored that of the empire, a testament to adaptability in the face of inevitable change. So, what are we to make of this grand narrative? The romanticized vision of the Khmer Empire as an eternal bastion of glory is as much a myth as the divine right of its kings. The empire's decline was not a tragedy of fate, but a complex interplay of human ambition, environmental challenges, and geopolitical shifts. It's a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest can falter when internal cohesion crumbles and external pressures mount. The Khmer Empire story is a reminder that history is not just a record of events, but a reflection of human nature, with all its triumphs and failings. And yet, amid the ruins, there is a glimmer of something enduring. Angkor Wat, with its grandeur and resilience, stands as a testament to the ingenuity and spirit of a people who dared to dream beyond the horizon. It's a monument not just to the past, but to the indomitable will to create, to adapt, and to endure. The temple is a relic of grandeur, yes, but also a symbol of human resilience, a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the human spirit remains unyielding. As we wrap up our journey through the history of the Khmer Empire, let's take a moment to appreciate the layers of complexity that history offers. Behind every grand narrative lies a tapestry of stories, of people, of struggles, of dreams both realized and lost. The Khmer Empire may have faded from the world stage, but its legacy endures, etched in stone and memory. It speaks to us across the centuries, a testament to the enduring dance between ambition and adversity, creation and decay. In the end, Angkor Wat is more than just an architectural wonder. It is a beacon of human aspiration, standing tall against the ravages of time. It urges us to look beyond the myths, to question the narratives we hold dear, and to recognize the intricate interplay of forces that shape our world. So, as the sun sets over the ancient stones, casting long shadows over the jungle, we are reminded that history is not just a chronicle of the past, but a dialogue with the present, a conversation that continues to inspire and challenge us today. The sun hasn't even thought about stretching over the horizon, and you're already awake, embracing the chill of early dawn. Welcome to another day in the life of a samurai during the Edo period, somewhere between 1600 and 1868. Forget what Hollywood taught you about perpetual sword fights and adrenaline-pumping duels. Today, we're diving into the real start to your day, which is more about spiritual reflection and less about slicing through enemies. First up, meditation. Before you can even think about picking up that katana, it's time to find your zen. You sit down, legs crossed, in the corner of your room, which is more tatami mat than floor. The paper walls around you, shoji, filter the soft light of the morning, creating an atmosphere that demands silence. Your focus is on your breath, a habit ingrained through years of the Zen Buddhist influence that pervades your life. Samurai aren't just warriors, They're spiritual seekers, philosophers even in their own way. So you're here, seeking clarity and calm before the day's demands. Now here, where we shatter that myth of non-stop warfare. Contrary to popular belief, you're not spending every waking hour on the battlefield. The Edo period is notably peaceful, a time when the Tokugawa shogunate keeps Japan in a firm grip of stability and isolation. This means that more often than not, your swordsmanship is an art form, a discipline, rather than a survival skill. You're more likely to be honing your skills in a dojo than spilling blood. Speaking of swords, next on the agenda is the ritual of sword maintenance. Your katana might not be seeing daily combat, but it's still a symbol of your honor and status. It's both weapon and soul. You carefully remove the blade from its lacquered sheath, inspecting it under the soft glow of the morning. The process is meticulous, wiping down the blade, applying a fine oil to prevent rust. This isn't just maintenance. It's a meditative practice, reinforcing the bond between you and the weapon. It's said that a samurai's sword is his soul, and that's not just some poetic flourish. It's a reflection of your discipline and identity. As the morning progresses, the aroma of breakfast begins to drift through your residence. Forget eggs and bacon. Your meal is the staple of rice and miso soup. It's simple, yes, but it's a meal that's been sustaining Japanese warriors for centuries. The rice, steamed to perfection, is a reminder of the agricultural backbone of your country. It's no coincidence that rice is both food and currency here. Meanwhile, the miso soup, a mix of fermented soybean paste, tofu and seaweed, is both nutritious and satisfying. This isn't just food, it's fuel for the disciplined life you lead. While you might be picturing samurai as isolated sword-swinging monks, let's add some context. By this period, many samurai are bureaucrats, administrators serving their daimyo, the feudal lords. Your life is deeply intertwined with the political and social fabric of the time. You're part of a complex hierarchy, a cog in the machine that keeps the shogunate's peace. Your day isn't just about personal honor. It's about maintaining the order and status quo of a society that's been finely tuned over decades. And what about those myths of samurai loyalty and unyielding honor? Sure, they make for great stories, but reality is always more nuanced. Samurai are human, subject to the same temptations and failings as the rest of us. Loyalty is often more about political expediency than unbreakable bonds. Betrayals happen, allegiances shift, just like any political game. It's a world where maintaining face and honor is as much about navigating social complexities as it is about personal virtue. As you finish your breakfast, the day begins to unfold. Each morning is a reminder that while you're part of a warrior class, the true battle lies in discipline, in maintaining the delicate balance of power and peace that defines the Edo period. This is your life, not as a Hollywood hero, but as a real samurai, steeped in ritual and responsibility, bound by duty and honor, not just in combat, but in every aspect of your daily existence. Now, with breakfast behind you and the day ahead, grab that ledger, because it's time to dive into the world of numbers and ink-stained fingers. Welcome to the midday duties of a samurai. Forget the battlefield for a moment. Today's weapon is bureaucracy. That's right, warrior of the pen and paper, you're part civil servant, part accountant. The Edo period might be famous for its stability, but that peace is maintained by the meticulous management of everything from rice fields to tax rolls. Let's talk taxes. Not the most thrilling subject, I know, but crucial nonetheless. Your daimyo, or feudal lord, relies on you to ensure the smooth collection of taxes from the peasants who work the land. Rice is the currency of choice, a system that dates back centuries. It's all about koku. One koku being the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year, roughly 150 kilograms. That's a lot of sushi potential if you think about it. The pressure is on to make sure every grain is accounted for. Miss a few koku, and suddenly the daimyo isn't so pleased. And you don't want to be the guy who explains to a sword-wielding lord why his coffers are light. But hold your horses. Samurai life isn't just about the dry arithmetic of rice. You're also a land manager, overseeing the agricultural practices and ensuring that the peasants meet production quotas. It's part science, part diplomacy. You've got to understand the seasons, the soil, and maybe even the occasional pest problem. Your success, or failure, directly impacts the prosperity of your domain. A bountiful harvest means you're the hero of the hour. A bad year, let's just say you might be meditating a little longer tomorrow morning. While we're at it, let's bust another myth. The samurai class isn't just a rigid hierarchy of sword-toting nobles. Many are effectively landowners, responsible for the welfare of those who work the fields. It's a microcosm of social responsibility, with each samurai acting as a mini-governor. You're not just a cog in the machine, you're one of its pivotal gears. Your actions echo through the community, affecting the lives of countless families. No pressure, right? And then there's the training. Not the epic duels you might be picturing, but something far more structured and consistent. The dojo is your midday escape from the monotony of paperwork. Here you refine your martial skills, practicing katas and sparring with fellow samurai. It's a disciplined routine, more about form and precision than brute strength. It's said that a samurai's greatest weapon is his mind, and here is where you sharpen it. Each movement is deliberate, an exercise in control and focus. And let's be honest, after a morning of balancing ledgers, swinging a bokken, a wooden training sword can be surprisingly cathartic. Training isn't just physical. You're expected to be a scholar and a strategist. You study The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, absorbing its lessons on the philosophy of combat and the way of the warrior. It's a mental workout, a chance to flex your cognitive muscles and emerge sharper than ever. This isn't just about fighting. It's about understanding the art of conflict and strategy, applicable to both the battlefield and the boardroom, though, granted, the latter wouldn't become a thing for a few more centuries. Now let's sprinkle in some political intrigue. The samurai are not just fighters, they're power players in a grand game of chess. Alliances are made, broken, and remade with dizzying speed. It's a world where loyalty is often tied to opportunity rather than honor. Sure, you're expected to serve your daimyo faithfully, but behind the scenes, there's a web of shifting loyalties and clandestine maneuvers. The samurai code, Bushido, may preach honor and loyalty, but the reality is often murkier than the romanticized tales suggest. With the afternoon sun dipping lower, you return to your administrative duties, perhaps hearing the soft rustle of paper as you sift through documents. It's a reminder that the life of a samurai is as much about governance as it is about combat. You're maintaining the social order, ensuring the stability that the Tokugawa shogunate values so highly. It's a delicate balance, one where a single misstep can unravel years of careful planning and negotiation. And just when you think you've got a handle on things, there's always the unexpected. Maybe the local magistrate decides to pay a visit, or a dispute between neighboring farmers requires your arbitration. It's your job to navigate these waters, maintaining peace and order. You're a mediator, a judge, and sometimes, when diplomacy fails, a silent enforcer of the shogunate's will. Here's the kicker. Despite the layers of responsibility, there's a certain satisfaction in it all. You're not just a samurai. You're part of a grand tapestry, a living history that shapes the future. Every decision, every action contributes to the legacy of your clan, your name, and your era. It's a heavy burden, but one carried with pride. As the day edges toward evening, you complete your tasks with the precision expected of a samurai. The paperwork is filed, the taxes are tallied, and the dojo echoes with the memory of your training. It's been a day filled with contrasts, peace and preparation, administration and anticipation. Yet, through it all, there's a rhythm, a sense of purpose that defines your existence. Stay tuned, because tomorrow promises another chapter in this intricate dance of duty and discipline. The life of a samurai, after all, is nothing if not a continuous journey, a never-ending quest for balance between the martial and the mundane. As the ink dries on your last scroll of the day, the samurai's journey is far from over. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the dojo, inviting you to trade the delicate brush for the sturdy bow. the pen for the practice sword. But it's time to expand the repertoire beyond the iconic katana. Let's talk about the buffet of martial arts that kept you and your fellow samurai on your toes, both literally and metaphorically. Archery, or Kudo, isn't just about hitting a target. It's about hitting the bullseye of your soul. With a yumi, a bow that stretches over 2 meters, you're not just drawing back the string, you're drawing from a tradition that dates back centuries. This isn't your average bow and arrow. The yumi's asymmetrical design gives it a unique advantage, allowing for a powerful draw without requiring the archer to stand up. It's like medieval ergonomics, designed for warfare from horseback. Not to mention, letting loose a perfectly aimed arrow is like finding serenity in chaos. For samurai, precision in Kudo was a reflection of the discipline in life, much like a well-aimed metaphor. Then there's jiu-jitsu, which could be likened to the art of being an unyielding human pretzel. Forget about brute force. This is all about technique, developed because sometimes you end up unarmed and way too close for comfort with an opponent. Samurai in the Edo period learned to use their enemy's momentum against them, employing throws, holds, and joint locks. Picture it as the original form of mixed martial arts, except your life, not a championship belt, is on the line. The idea is simple. If you can't outmuscle your adversary, outsmart them. And if you're thinking this sounds like the backdrop of a modern action movie, you're not wrong. It's an ancient art with modern appeal. But let's not forget that life isn't all about combat. A samurai's training included the cultural arts, a chance to embrace their inner poet-warrior. Calligraphy, or shodo, was considered a reflection of one's inner state. The brush strokes had to be confident, fluid, and deliberate, much like a samurai's actions on the battlefield. It's said that the way you write can reveal your character, and for a samurai, every kanji was a chance to display elegance and control. Practicing calligraphy was about more than creating art. It was about discipline and expression, a way to leave your mark on the world without wielding a sword. And speaking of leaving an impression, let's not overlook the tea ceremony, or chanu. At first glance, it might seem like a quaint way to pass the time, but it's a ritual steeped in philosophy. The samurai participated in these ceremonies as a form of meditative practice. Preparing and serving tea wasn't just hospitality. It was an art that demanded grace and attention to detail. Every movement was choreographed, from the way you held the tea whisk to the precise temperature of the water. It was a performance, a momentary escape where social status took a backseat to mindfulness and mutual respect. It's like the original mindfulness app, but with better snacks. Now, while we're breaking down the romanticized veneer, here's a nugget of truth. The samurai class wasn't always as cultured as they were portrayed. Many had to learn these arts later in life, as the need for a versatile skill set became apparent in a less war-torn society. Imagine a hardened warrior being told they need to master the delicate art of folding a kimono. The juxtaposition is almost comical, yet it underscores the samurai's adaptability. The ability to pivot from martial prowess to cultural sophistication was not just encouraged, it was essential. As the afternoon wanes, you might find yourself reflecting on how these various arts, both martial and cultural, shape your identity. It's not just about being a soldier, it's about being a well-rounded individual. The samurai were expected to be warriors, scholars, and artists, a trifecta of skills that made them formidable both on and off the battlefield. It's a reminder that strength without wisdom is like a sword without a blade, impressive, but ultimately ineffective. And while it's tempting to romanticize this balance of warrior and artist, let's not forget the economic backdrop. Keeping up with such diverse training required resources, time, money, and connections. Not every samurai had the luxury of extensive training in all arts, especially those of lower rank or limited means. It's a harsh truth that while some flourished, others struggled to maintain the expected standards. It was a layered society, with its own set of challenges and inequities. So, as you hang up your bow and brush for the day, remember that being a samurai was more than just a role. It was a lifestyle, a constant quest for balance between the physical and the philosophical. The dojo may have been your sanctuary, but the lessons learned there transcended its walls, influencing every aspect of your life. Each art practiced, each skill honed, was a step toward mastering the ultimate challenge, the art of living well. With the evening drawing near, the dojo echoes with the day's efforts, a symphony of sweat, ink, and tea leaves. The life of a samurai, it turns out, is a continuous dance between the martial and the mundane, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who walk the line between legend and reality. As the sun sets, casting its final glow over the tatami mats, you prepare for what tomorrow might bring. Because in the world of the samurai, the journey is never truly over. As the sun sets, you step out of the dojo, muscles weary but spirits serene, and swap your training gear for a more formal attire. Evening in feudal Japan isn't just a time to unwind. It's a time to engage with the community and fulfill the myriad social obligations that underscore the life of a samurai. Forget the image of the solitary warrior meditating under a cherry blossom tree. Instead, picture a man deeply embedded in the social fabric, an essential thread in the tapestry of Edo society. First up, it's shrine time. Visiting a local Shinto shrine isn't just a spiritual obligation, it's a social one. Shrines are community centers, places where you catch up on local news while making offerings to the kami, or spirits. You perform a series of bows, claps, and prayers, a ritual as much about maintaining social harmony as divine favor. On the surface, it's a simple act of reverence, but beneath lies a complex web of social dynamics. You're not just paying respects to the gods, you're reinforcing your role within the community and maintaining your family's reputation. And speaking of family, let's address the myth of the lone samurai. In reality, you're far from isolated. Your status is tied to your family's honor, and that means keeping up appearances. Marriages among samurai are less about romance and more about strategic alliances, much like a feudal version of a corporate merger. The union between samurai families is a calculated move to consolidate power, wealth, and influence. Love might be a happy accident, but duty comes first. Your evening might include a formal dinner with in-laws, where the stakes are higher than the finest sushi on the table. Now, don't get me wrong. The samurai might not have Tinder, but matchmaking is a serious business. Professional matchmakers, known as nakodo, play a pivotal role, ensuring that family alliances are mutually beneficial. Your marriage prospects are discussed over tea, with both families weighing the economic and social benefits. It's a far cry from the romanticized vision of star-crossed lovers. And while it sounds cold, it's a reminder that in a world where social standing can make or break you, strategic marriages are a form of survival. Community events are another highlight of your evening. Festivals or matsuri are a chance to unwind and mingle. They're colorful spectacles filled with music, dance, and an array of food stalls. Think of it as a 17th century street fair. Participation isn't just about fun. It's a civic duty. You're expected to be present, to engage, and to uphold the values of your community. These gatherings reinforce social bonds and provide a platform for networking, an early form of LinkedIn, but with better snacks and no Wi-Fi. Now let's get into etiquette, a cornerstone of samurai culture. The Bushido Code isn't just about fighting honorably, it's about living honorably. This means adhering to strict social protocols, from how you bow to how you forsake. Each gesture is deliberate, a reflection of your status and respect for others. The rules of etiquette are intricate, with unspoken cues that dictate every interaction. It's a daily dance, one that requires precision and awareness. Slip up and you risk not just personal embarrassment, but bringing shame upon your family. And here's the kicker. Etiquette isn't just superficial. It's a social currency, a way to navigate the hierarchical society of Edo, Japan. Politeness is power, a tool to maneuver through the complex web of alliances and rivalries. The way you address someone, the depth of your bow, the timing of your words, all these elements are strategic moves in the game of social chess. It's a reminder that in a world obsessed with honor, appearances matter as much as actions. As the evening progresses, you might find yourself at a local tea house, engaging in discussions that are part social, part political. Tea houses are more than just places to sip matcha. They're hubs of information and influence. Conversations here can shape alliances and alter perceptions. You might discuss the latest edicts from the shogunate or the economic state of your province. It's a chance to gauge the mood of your peers, to understand the undercurrents that could impact your future. In this setting, knowledge is power, and every word is a potential weapon. And let's not forget about the economic realities that underpin these social interactions. Maintaining your status as a samurai isn't cheap. From the upkeep of your armor to the cost of participating in community events, the financial burden is significant. Many samurai find themselves in debt, borrowing against future rice yields to keep up appearances. It's a precarious balance, one that requires careful management of resources. The myth of the noble warrior clashes with the harsh reality of financial strain, a reminder that even the most venerated can be vulnerable. As the night deepens, you return home, reflecting on the day's events. You're not just a warrior. You're a member of a community, a family, a society that demands constant engagement. The life of a samurai is a series of obligations, a delicate dance between personal honor and public duty. It's a world where every action is scrutinized, every decision weighed against the backdrop of tradition and expectation. The lone samurai myth may persist in popular culture, but the truth is far richer, more complex. You're part of a social ecosystem, one where your worth is measured not just by your skill with a sword, but by your ability to navigate the intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that define your existence. As you lay down to sleep, you're reminded that the life of a samurai is a never-ending journey, a quest not just for personal glory, but for the survival and prosperity of your family and community. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, another chance to prove your worth in a world that demands excellence on every front. So rest well, because the dawn of a new day is just a few hours away, and with it, the endless cycle of duty and honor begins anew. The room is quiet, except for the soft rustle of your kimono as you settle down, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that dance across the sliding shoji doors. Evening rituals are the bookends of a samurai's day, offering a moment to pause and reflect on the chaos and order that define your existence. It's time to pen down the day's thoughts in your personal journal, a practice that's as much about discipline as it is about introspection. You pull out a brush and inkstone, the tools of your nightly catharsis. It's not just about recounting events, but distilling lessons, a process akin to extracting sake from rice, one grain at a time. Journaling for the samurai isn't mere record-keeping, it's a dialogue with the self, a written meditation. Here's where you lay bare the internal battles that the world doesn't see, the doubts, the ambitions, the fleeting moments of triumph. You jot down the minutiae, the taxes collected, the disputes settled, the kata perfected in the dojo. But it's not just a list, it's a narrative that intertwines personal growth with duty. This documentation is a legacy, a way to leave a mark that's more enduring than the swing of any sword. As you write, the romanticized image of the lone warrior fades, replaced by the reality of a man deeply entrenched in obligations. You're not just a soldier, you're a civil servant, a family man, a cog in the intricate machinery of Edo society. The myth of the samurai as a solitary figure, driven solely by honor and loyalty, crumbles under the weight of daily responsibilities. It's a life of constant balancing between self and society, tradition and progress. The pen, in this case, is as mightily nuanced as the sword. Once the ink dries, it's time for meditation, a practice embedded in the samurai ethos thanks to the pervasive influence of Zen Buddhism. You sit in seiza, the formal kneeling posture, on the tatami mat. The room is silent save for the rhythmic sound of your breathing, a cadence that drowns out the chaos of the day. Meditation isn't just a spiritual exercise. It's a mental reset, a way to sharpen your focus and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. The stillness of the room mirrors the stillness you seek in your mind, a momentary reprieve from the endless cycle of duty. Zen teaches you to embrace impermanence, a concept that resonates deeply with the samurai's world. The cherry blossom, fleeting in its bloom, is a poignant symbol of this transience, a reminder that life, like seasons, is ephemeral. It's a humbling thought, one that keeps the ego in check and underscores the importance of living with purpose, even if that purpose is dictated by the strictures of your rank and role. As you meditate, it's easy to see why the romanticized warrior ethos persists. The image of the noble samurai, unswerving in his dedication, is alluring, a narrative that simplifies the complexities of history into digestible drama. But the truth is often less glamorous. The samurai are bound by duty not just to their daimyo, but to a system that requires unwavering loyalty to the shogunate, a hierarchy that offers little room for personal ambition outside its prescribed roles. This is not to say that the samurai are devoid of agency. Far from it. Within the confines of their duty, they find moments of resistance, spaces where personal choice can shape legacy. The art of tea, the stroke of a brush, the precision of an arrow, all are acts of rebellion against a life defined by warfare and bureaucracy. These are the moments where the myth and the man intersect, where the samurai becomes more than just a tool of the state. In questioning the romanticized vision of the samurai, we uncover a deeper truth. The life of a samurai is a testament to the power of discipline and the resilience of the human spirit. It's about finding harmony in a world that demands both submission and strength. The romantic allure of the samurai isn't in their supposed invincibility, but in their humanity, in the way they navigate a world that often asks for more than they can give. As the candle burns low, you rise from meditation with a newfound clarity. The day is done, but the lessons linger, echoing in the silence of the night. You prepare for sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring another set of challenges, another opportunity to prove your worth not just as a warrior, but as a man of honor in a world where honor is both a burden and a badge. So, as you lay your head down, consider this. The samurai's legacy isn't built on tales of conquest or glory, but on the quiet strength found in everyday rituals. It's in the ink-stained fingers, the measured breaths, the silent vows to uphold a code that, while flawed, strives for a greater ideal. In a society where every action is scrutinized, the true measure of a samurai lies not in the battles fought, but in the life lived with intention and integrity. It's a reminder that the path of the samurai, much like life itself, is a journey defined not by the destinations reached, but by the steps taken along the way. As sleep envelops you, know that the story of the samurai, like your own, continues to unfold, one day, one choice, one meditation at a time.